This is Power Athlete Radio. With your hosts, Denny K, Professor Booty, and the Luke Summers. And now, toes forward, hips locked, shoulders set, and retract those scapulars. It's time for some knowledge bombs.
Thanks for tuning into Power Athlete Radio. The legendary Robb Wolf graces the stage of the 2015 Power Athlete Symposium in Costa Mesa, California. A listen to this awesome question and answer session will leave you busting with new insights into nutrition, sleep, and other recovery practices. When Robb Wolf speaks, people listen. Touching on topics like new pre- and post-workout research, insulin responses, cholesterol 101, and finding your true training capacity, Robb leaves no stone unturned. In true form, he fields the questions from our attending coaches with ease and intellect. There's so much excellent flow going on in this conversation that we chose to keep the audience questions in the audio, despite their being a bit muffled. However, what you will hear with distinct clarity is Robb's passion for health and performance, and for imparting even a fraction of that onto you, the listener. This is episode 134.
All right, Power Athlete Nation, what's going on? This is Luke here, no Denny K, because we are on site at Power Athlete HQ after the first speaker of our 2015 Power Athlete Symposium, Mr. Robb Wolf. Round of applause, everybody. So, Robb, I guess give a brief synopsis of what we were just kind of talking about.
We talked about performance optimization, and really, I think at the outset, the big takeaways were asking, who are you, as an athlete, what type of work you do, how old are you, and then also looking at what your goals are and really trying to overlay those so that you have a clear view of where you want to go with regards to performance, health, and longevity. So trying to figure out where you're at on the map, where you want to go on the map, and kind of the trade-offs inherent to that. And then talking about sleep, food, exercise, gut biome that's going to play into getting you to your goal.
Perfect. And so much more. And what it came down to is there's, questions about individualization and how we can create a customized approach and what is that truly effective. And I know that nutrition is such a sketchy or hairy subject. We can go down so many different veins, and what we have here is we got 35 people in the crowd, and we wanted to open up the Q&A for the podcast just to give a lot of our listeners a taste of what's going down here this weekend. So I guess if you have a question, let's just go with the old hand raise method. Connor Lynch.
So we got all these great prescriptions for nutrition with specific caloric numbers based on if you want to lose, maintain, gain. Is there any prescription you put out there for sleep in terms of numbers to hit, environmental adjustments? How do we get people a number they can get excited about? Oh, I need to hit this metric for my sleep.
Man, question for the sleep. I was just talking to somebody moments ago about, do you partition carbs to the AM? Do you partition carbs to the PM? That again becomes really pretty subjective story. One thing is that if people are chronically underfed, they'll probably find it difficult to sleep because it's kind of a stress response. This is maybe an argument for sticking carbs more in the evening, because we will tend to get a blunting of cortisol. It kind of turns on the parasympathetic nervous system. You feel more relaxed, and you're kind of more amenable towards going to sleep. But that's there's some nuance to it. But one thing to definitely keep in mind is, if we're trying to lean somebody out, this is maybe an argument for a zigzag diet, where you have a couple of days of lower calorie intake, maybe lower carbohydrate intake, then a couple of days of higher, so that we don't cause an undue stress on the system over a period of time. And then also you just have to play with it a little bit. And again, whatever's probably going to optimize sleep for folks is the way that you want to go with things. So they'll play with more or less carbs, for that last meal, and then higher or lower glycemic load. Like, do they do well with potatoes versus lentils, being a high versus low glycemic load? And those are some really good things to play with.
I could also, as opposed to considering in conjunction with nutrition, on its own, what would your baseline metrics for sleep in general be? If I'm going to get an athlete excited about, hey, you need to hit this number of hours at this time, how do I split up once they can write it down?
Completely answered not the question that you asked. Sorry about that.
But it was really good. I mean,
still pretty solid.
I do my best work when I have no idea what I'm actually saying. The way to get people motivated about sleep, man, it's just the greatest return on investment that they're going to get from anything, regardless of training stimulus, regardless of nutrition. And also, if they are undersleeping, you can do anything that you want with regards to nutrition, and you aren't going to get the body composition that you want. Like it is just the lowest hanging of low hanging fruit that you could get. The really challenging people that we see are kind of corporate exec, hard charger, type A. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Sleep is for the weak. And what I do usually is challenge them. Give me 1 week where you really legitimately sleep. You go to bed earlier. Not a lot of electronics. Like that's a biggie for the sleep hygiene. Pitch black room, no electronics in the room. Your bed is for sleep or sex only. It's not to say that you can't have sex elsewhere, but you only you're not watching TV in bed and all that stuff. And so really addressing sleep hygiene. And if you can just get people to try it, usually they will hate you because it ends up impacting their social life and a bunch of other things like that. But they end up looking, feeling, performing better immediately. But it can be a hard sell for some folks. And then you have, particularly for us, I think we work with a lot of police, military, and firefighters. People in the medical professions kind of fall into this too, and new parents definitely fall into this. If you are forced into a scenario where you can't sleep or you have a flip circadian rhythm because you're doing shift work, it's very difficult. And the takeaway with that is just when you can sleep, protect it at gunpoint. Dark room, use Doc Parsley sleep cocktail, find some other sort of non-pharmaceutical sleep aid that works. Ambien, alcohol, diphenhydramine like Benadryl, they do not make you sleep, they make you unconscious. Metabolically, it's not too much different than if I hit Luke in the head with a brick. Nobody would say Luke was asleep. He's
that makes sense.
And
with the alcohol.
and the restorative element to that is similar. Like people say, I have a couple of glasses of wine to relax in the evening and it helps me sleep. It makes you fall into the first stage of sleep faster, but you don't get into level 3 and 4 sleep, which is where the real restoration occurs. And so that's one of these things where you've got to drink as far away from bedtime as you can. So what do you do in that case?
Day drinking.
You wake up and start drinking. Yeah.
Robb Wolf, we have to start day drinking.
Day drinking.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the sleep hygiene, booze, other sleep aids, like those are the biggies. And then as far as motivating the person, if you can just get them to try it, then they're going to be pretty bought in after that. Like it's really an eye opener. My wife is working with our next door neighbor, and this gal has had autoimmune conditions, some significant weight gain because of the systemic inflammatory issue. She has 4 kids, great family, but like she was really letting the kids dictate her schedule. And my wife was just on her again, like she's a feisty Italian woman. And so she was on her about this stuff. And she basically said, I'm going to bed at 9 o'clock. You kids are making your lunches. And she had been stalled at this weight loss and stalled with some progress on her autoimmune kind of resolution. As soon as she started sleeping better, like she dropped a pant size in like a week and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's really amazing. Like sleep sounds like this magical pill, and it really is. Like it's just amazing how much better things work when they are sleeping. But it's a hard sell. I totally get it.
Is there any merit to a sleep bank? So say I am goals 8 hours, and life makes me only get 5 or 6 because we got to travel. So where do I make it up? Is it a week window, a 2-week window? Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, and I pull all this stuff from Doc Parsley. I am not knowledgeable on this at all. I'm completely stealing all his material. There's great studies showing that banking sleep definitely mitigates effects downstream. There's an unfortunate practice in a lot of the special operations community when folks are preparing for deployment and they know they're going to be on night ops, they start actually staying up to get ready for that event, and it's a horrible mistake. Like, you try to stay as tightly on your normal circadian rhythm, you sleep as best you can, as long as you can, because as you say, the only analogy that I can think of there is, will getting kicked in the balls prepare you for additional getting kicked in the balls? Only if it's so hard that they're just gone, you know? That's the only thing, and that's not really a great outcome. So to the degree that you can bank sleep, catch up on sleep, that's really, it will help, and there's great research to support that.
Before we get going on other questions, I want to go back to, talking about the hard sell to the execs, and I guess one of our experiences with the high level executive is they look for lifestyle fixes, much like they look for business fixes. And the term that you kind of closed with was hacks, right? And I want to get kind of a spicy Robb Wolf going on why you don't like a lot of the hacks out there. And just also give a disclaimer that our definition of hack at Power Athlete is someone who is like hacking shit up. Like, right. That guy's a hack. He's a jabroni. Jamoke. So like, it's this biohacking shortcut. And I guess the lesson that we closed the lecture with was there's no shortcuts. There's no hack. But what are some of these hacks out there, and why they piss you off so much? Yeah,
the term hack pisses me off in general because it implies that there's a shortcut to the stuff, and there's not. We have fundamentals, and then you have consistency. And you find the fundamentals, whether it's sleep, food, exercise, and if you're consistent with that, then you make progress. And if you don't, then you're not going to make progress. And on the sleep front, there are some things like polyphasic sleep, where people will sleep 20 minutes every 4 hours or something like that. These are mitigation techniques, and they're very well vetted out in the military scene, particularly pilots. Like they have a really amazing kind of matrix for you can be awake for 36 hours if you get a nap every 5 hours. It needs to be 20 minutes because it drops you into the level 1, level 2 sleep, and you get a restoration of your cognitive function. It doesn't restore the body.
So what Da Vinci did?
Yeah. So a lot of very creative people, they will use this, but it's you're still, there's some downside to it. There's some downside to it. Yeah.
Hilarious.
There's a lot of creative people that get serious mileage out of heroin, and there's also there's some downside to that too. It's not, we would probably have much less music if opiates had never been discovered, but there's some downside to that. But the polyphasic sleep is one of them that gets sold as, hey, this is even better than normal sleep, and it's not. It is absolutely not. Now, again, if you're in an austere environment or you're really under a lot of pressure, like we have 2 kids under the age of 4, and when we can grab a nap, I grab a nap because it plugs the hole on that. The average parent, by the time that their child is 2 years old, they have missed 6 months of sleep.
Wow.
And that's no fucking joke. Like, and it's pretty accurate. Maybe you get a little more lucky, maybe you get a little less lucky on that, but that's a significant impact. And if you can grab a nap, then it will help a ton, but it's not as good, but it's better than doing nothing. But I would say probably the polyphasic sleep is one of the biggest hacks that are sold as a sleep, only better than sleep, but it's really not. It's a little bit, I guess maybe an analogy there is that we know in training circles, high intensity intervals can be very beneficial for building initial aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity, but you only have about a 4-week window on that of adaptation, and then aerobic and anaerobic capacity drops off, and the person goes into an overtraining sequence. So again, we have to drop back to training fundamentals. You have to build an aerobic base, and you need some periodization and switching things up to be able to make that work long term. And we're just, think about this a little bit from an evolutionary perspective. If you buy into evolution, every organism on the planet sleeps. How precarious is your life while you're sleeping? Would it be easy for something to kill you and eat you? Yeah, and everything on the planet sleeps, and it has to figure out a strategy to deal with that sleep process, but no organism on the planet has figured out how to not sleep because it's it's just baked into the cake. We have this active activity while we're awake, And then we need a restorative feature to that on the back end. And if biology had figured out a way around that, it would have figured it out by now. So, we think that we can circumvent biology, and we can't. Again, it becomes a story of trade-offs, whether you're trying to finish a PhD or you're in your residency or something. You're going to have to give up some performance and maybe some health to reach this ultimate goal, but it comes at a cost, and we just need to recognize that and then do mitigating tactics like polyphasic sleep, but it doesn't replace sleep at all.
Cool. Chad, do you have a question?
Yeah. Can you elaborate on the problems with sugar intake post-traumatic brain injury, and then parlay that into some advice or recommendations for, let's say, high school football athletes during season, practice, training, all that?
Yeah, there's some great research emerging that looks at traumatic brain injury, that's a whole interesting topic in and of itself. And again, thinking about police, military, fire personnel, youth athletics, heading a soccer ball is a small level traumatic brain injury. Going down a roller coaster where you get a 1G change in your body position is a small level traumatic brain injury. Deploying a parachute is a low grade traumatic brain injury. Firing a 50 cal rifle is a traumatic brain injury. So there are people out there that are sustaining traumatic brain injuries every day, all the time. And what happens in that TBI environment is that the brain becomes transiently, for a short term, becomes insulin resistant. And kind of two things happen with that. If it's insulin resistant, then it becomes starved for a fuel substrate, which normally it runs off of glucose. If it becomes starved for that fuel substrate, you can get some damage that occurs to the neurons. The neurons don't like dramatic changes in blood glucose. If it goes too high, goes too low, the neurons die, and then we get a feed-forward mechanism of additional injury to the brain. And some of these sugary drinks spike insulin, and you would think that maybe that would be a good thing under the circumstances of that insulin-resistant brain. And I got to be honest, I don't fully understand the mechanisms on it, but what appears to happen is that you increase the inflammatory response in the brain, and we actually get a worsening of that process. There are some pretty good animal studies and even some human studies where people who've been dehydrated, exposed to a TBI type event, but they just rehydrate with water, we don't see a worsening of the inflammatory response. And then if they get some sort of a sugary, dense carbohydrate drink, it seems to worsen that response. And it's pretty cryptic and really, really important for, youth athletics, police, military, fire, anybody in combative type training, like they're all facing this problem.
How quickly could that react? Let's say you're during competition and you cognitive function with impaired cognitive function, that quickly during competition, as opposed to you're hydrating water or Gatorade.
Say that again. I'm not sure I fully.
So if you're, a football athlete and you're obviously experiencing traumatic brain during the game, and you're hydrating with Gatorade throughout the game, could cognitive function be impaired due to that?
I guess in the moment it could be, but what I'm really concerned with is the long-term cumulative effects there. Yeah. I don't know that you would probably notice that much of an effect in the moment. But this is maybe an argument for like using a ketone ester or ketone salt during an event, because it provides an alternate fuel substrate that actually is anti-inflammatory. And if the brain is insulin resistant and not able to access glucose very effectively, those ketone bodies, and even actually there's a product that's been out for ages, Cytomax, lactate itself, like a polylactate solution, is another way to address this. So you're not introducing more glucose to the system, but you're introducing one of these carboxylic acids either out of the lactate pathway or out of the ketone body pathway that can provide an alternate fuel substrate for folks. So I'm actually revisiting this product called Cytomax, which is a polylactate product. And I think that the total carbohydrate load in it is pretty low, and it's mainly providing fuel from that polylactate kind of substrate. And in my mind, and again, some of this stuff is a bit of a guess, but if you are able to circumvent the limited glucose input, not increase inflammation, but provide another substrate for the neurons, then you're going to mitigate that pro-inflammatory effect.
Now, Chad, are you talking, because I know you have the Athlete Factory, tons of contact sports athletes. So you're saying your guys on the sideline are armed with some of these options, and they know they got their bell rung because anyone's played contact sports. When you start speaking French and you never learn French, you're like, I think I'm
wrong sideline.
Yeah, got concussed. But when they give the tap or pull, immediately have this stuff prepared. Because do you have good relationship with your coaches?
Yeah.
So arming them with that information and with these alternatives, you're talking about. That's what you're looking for, is kind of that approach, right? Yeah, it's good stuff. Paula.
This goes back to a comment that John made about, and it's also customization. He said that he doesn't require as many carbohydrates because he uses them very efficiently, as opposed to Luke, who requires more because he uses them inefficiently.
Inner workout potato chips.
Wow, I like the way you're rolling. That sounds good.
Both, high level athletes. So why is that? Could you elaborate on the physiology? Is it because Luke blows through them quickly, thus they're not the most efficient energy source, or the whys, I guess?
That's a really good question. I mean, clearly there's some genetics there. Like you have the hormonal response, so insulin, glucagon, that whole story. You have gut microbiota, so like what type of gut bacteria these guys have. If you have somebody that has a disordered gut microbiota and they consume simple carbohydrates, or even just carbohydrates in general, when you have pathological or pathogenic gut microbiota, it makes you sick when you eat it. Like you feel foggy headed, you feel lethargic. So I mean, that's a layer of the onion. Another layer of it is the genetics of just like your cellular makeup. Like what type of enzymes do the enzymes that you have, are they predisposed towards fat mobilization and utilization? Are they more carbohydrate oriented? So you have a really complex puzzle there. And the interesting thing with the gut microbiota, that can change day to day. Like if you are a night shift person, let's say you're not a night shift person, but you have one night of disordered sleep, your gut bacteria is different and more pathologic the day after disordered sleep than it was the day before. So even, you think about genetics and you think about some other physiological components, that gut microbiota can change day to day and can be pathological or non-pathological just based off of that. Like it'd be interesting to further test these guys, do a genomic analysis of their gut microbiota and see if there's a really big change there. Oh, and it's Paul asked the question and it's her phone going on. That's cool.
Didn't put that on fire.
You could let it roll, and then you have to answer it on speakerphone.
Did you guys see the Onion had a piece, and it was twisted, an aged twisted sister finally acquiesces and says they will take it. Awesome. So that was a lot of me jabbering, probably because I don't know the exact answer to it. Like there's just so many variables to that. I would be really interested in looking at gut microbiome to see if there's a significant difference there. And maybe, like John being the bastard that he is, I wouldn't be surprised if he's got like this Inuit Hadza perfect gut microbiome, and like all the rest of us have this like super fucked up westernized gut biome. And so then if we did some prebiotic, probiotic tinkering with Luke, would that alter his glucose utilization? Because again, like if you make somebody inflamed, far down the road do I want to get with this? When somebody experiences sepsis, say like they're going in and doing surgery and they nick the bowel and they become septic, the bacteria that spill into our circulation, it releases this stuff called LPS, lipopolysaccharide, and it makes us diabetic now, like instantly, flips a switch. And the difference between sepsis and type 2 diabetes is virtually impossible to tell if you were looking at the blood work on these two people. A septic patient looks essentially like a horrifically controlled type 2 diabetic. We, being westernized folks, typically are running around with some degree of low-level sepsis. And when you are inflamed, it makes you insulin resistant, which makes you not all that good at utilizing carbohydrates as a substrate. And because you're insulin resistant, you can't access fat as a fuel substrate all that well. Everything just kind of sucks. So could this all boil down to just changes in the gut microbiome? Could be, but I don't know. And this is where
try
it's, yeah, I mean, this is really, for me, the interesting next step is when we start overlaying gut biome with genetics and input-output of training stimulus and nutritional stimulus. But it's wickedly complex. There was just a paper in Cell that basically made the point that all the stuff is highly individualized. Like, I don't know if you guys saw it. It's an amazing, really beautifully done paper. But they had folks that they put through this protocol where they looked at their genetics, looked at their blood glucose level. They actually inserted a continuous blood glucose monitor that monitored blood glucose every 5 minutes. So they knew they had 800 people in this. They ended up with like 5 million blood glucose data points over the course of 8 weeks. And what they found is that there was this massive variation. Like, some people had virtually no insulin response to carbohydrates, and their blood glucose barely went up. It was well maintained. It didn't matter what type of carbohydrate it was. They had some really interesting examples where one person ate a cookie and a banana separately. The cookie caused high blood glucose response. The banana caused low blood glucose response. Another person, the banana caused high blood glucose response. The cookie caused almost no blood glucose response. And there's all kinds of potential reasons behind that. But this is where it becomes really, really difficult to pin down a one-size-fits-all recommendation. You have to really, and this is where maybe you get in and you start doing some post-meal finger sticks to see what blood glucose levels are and track that over 3 or 4 hours. Eat a very monotonous, similar diet over the course of a couple of weeks so that you can track that. This gets kind of neurotic, but it really gives you a lot of great data to ferret out some of that stuff.
It's that experiment and see what works best.
Yeah.
We're all so different.
Yeah. I wish that I had a one-size-fits-all thing and I could just be like, okay, I'm going to start coconut farming, but I just can't do it.
So, Levi, you didn't travel far enough. Dave, did you have a question?
I did. I actually had two real quick. Can you touch on the sort of sleep deprivation thing a little bit? Maybe it's not your wheelhouse, but like in that community, like that is a big thing. Like how you train for being up for 2 days, you stay up, right? You say that's not.
Well, there's a selection process versus then what they do after selection. So, like if they, going through Buds and Hell Week as a SEAL, what they're checking is where do these people break and do they break? And some interesting data that comes out of the SEAL community. These folks, when they're placed under stress, they tend to get about 600% more of this stuff called neuropeptide Y. And it's a stress inoculation hormone, neurotransmitter. Most of the rest of us, when we get placed under stress, neuropeptide Y drops. So these guys actually have a beneficial response, and they have a response that is off the Richter better. But you can still break these guys. And what doesn't get taken home from a lot of those communities, the selection process is critical to sort, the people who can deal with this type of volume and the intensity of it and everything. But you don't necessarily need to train like that all the time afterwards.
So is that response genetic? So these guys are gravitating towards it, or does it just can it be trained?
I would say it's largely genetic, in my opinion.
Not a process of their prior service training, kind of something that they've adapted to up until that point.
I think it's genetic. Just like, I'm sure that somewhere in John's, youth, he got exposed to 40-meter runs, 400-meter runs, 800-meter runs, and he was way better at the 40-meter stuff than what, you just start, it's like dropping a marble down a sorting deal, and he just kind of rattled through that. And so I think a lot of the guys that end up in the special operations communities, just the fact that they went into the military is a different sorting process. And they're like, well, I want to be a SEAL. They're just the desire to do that is a different deal. But John and I were on the NSW Resiliency Committee for about 6 years. And then as we've wound down so many of the deployments, we haven't done as many of those gigs. But the feedback that we got from the guys was just having somebody with some experience like us saying, it's okay to not burn the candle at both ends. It's okay to wait up until the day of deployment, sleep as well as you can, eat as well as you can, and go into that as robust and healthy as you can. And the guys would come back and they're like, yeah, I'm way better this time. Yeah.
And then just because this is a boom, sort of people or whatever, right? This nutrition talk is, to be honest, over the head of a lot of people, right? So, you know, I have a guy who does jiu-jitsu and, you know, eats out 6 days a week and it's crap. And he's like, hey, what do I do? And if I were to start talking to him like this, so do you have any, like, you know, like, where do you start with some of those people? Or are there some resources that I can point them to when they're not just getting ready to get problems?
That's great point. I would never recommend that you talk to clients at this level of detail. Never, ever, ever. One, you'll have like 2 people left in your gym, and the 2 people that are left in the gym, all that they're going to do is want to talk about this shit, and you'll never get anything done. So that's a great point, and I apologize for not clarifying that before. For us, depending on the person, like it sounds like with this guy, my deal is always a relationship with these people of like, well, what do you want? And if this guy is coming to me and he's like, you know, my knees hurt at jits, my shoulders hurt, and I can never make weight. Depending on the relationship I have with them, I'm like, listen, you fat fuck. Like, you're paying me money to try to get you somewhere and you're not fucking listening to me. So where are we at? Either you do what I tell you to do or quit being a bitch and complain. My 35-year-old soccer mom, I probably have a completely different conversation where it's like, hey, listen, you know, you're coming to me, you have these concerns, but you're really not following through. And we have a relationship here and an obligation. Like you're committed to me, I'm committed to you, but you've got to meet me part way. Like we're only here an hour, 3 days a week. And then you've got the other 24 hours and the days in between, and you've got to follow this other stuff to make this stuff work. So, I mean, it's really, making them accountable, you know, and yeah.
So like, this is just something that I kind of came up with, but like when I run into these people, like I'll say to them, like, you have to, like, before you do anything, right, you have to start cooking. Yeah. You can't come to me and be like, should I, cut this out and this out and this out and add this and this and this, and then you're still eating that, right? But like some of that stuff is super overwhelming for people, you know. Do you have like an approach that's like, just not so terrifying to the average person, or like somewhere to go?
Yeah, and so on my website, you go to robbwolf.com. I have a quick start guide there that actually details a couple of these different approaches. We have like the all-in, which is like no grains, no legumes, no dairy. You start cooking at home, and some of that is just kind of talking to the person, like, so what level are you willing to cook some food at home? And they look at you and they're like, I don't know how to boil water. And you're like, okay, so and that's where you grab like my dining out guide, which here's the places to go. And like, so In and Out is a great example. 2 double meats, protein style, get a couple of fries. Do you want to eat French fries every day? Probably not, but In and Out is one of the only places I know that doesn't cook any other things in the oil, so it's actually gluten-free French fries. Like I can never eat French fries because they always fry everything in that stuff. So I'm at least keeping them gluten-free. We're getting some carbohydrate, the vegetable oil. I'll just kind of like, bury my head, not really worry about it too much. But that's going to be a net win versus a soda and the bun and all this other stuff. So again, it's probably querying that person to figure out where they're at and what their minimum buy-in is. And oftentimes, like a lot of this is, what's one meal a day that you could cook at home? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and try to get them doing like one meal a day in, and then educate them better about the choices that they can make. Like they run into any supermarket, they get some lunch meat, they get some apples, they get a bag of almonds, good to go. So I think that's a lot of what you can help them. Yeah, but it's a lot of work. I mean, gymming ain't easy, and coaching people is not easy. Like you really need to be gratified by the process and not necessarily the result. I'm a little bit more of an engineer in that regard. I really like result-oriented stuff, which is why I was such a dick as a coach in the gym, because I was really, focused on that. But a better balance would be just being very process-oriented and enjoying the relationship that you have with the person, then you're able to engage them and meet them where they are. And you definitely need a different hat that you wear, depending on what comes in.
Levi.
We've bounced around this a couple times and you've alluded to it. You're obviously beginning to tailor eating protocols for people, and you're testing and retesting that using blood. What kind of markers are you looking for in addition to HDL, LDL, triglycerides, glucose levels, and are there specific numbers that you're looking for that may be out of the range of an ACSM or a generic medical doctor?
Yeah, so I'll focus on one specific thing, and that's the LDL particle count. You could go to your doc and you could have what looks like normal cholesterol, but you actually have high LDL particle count. And so, and to back up a little bit, cholesterol is a substance that our body needs. We can get it from the diet, our bodies manufacture it, but they get carried around the body in these things called lipoproteins. So the lipoprotein is like a car, the cholesterol is like the passenger. It doesn't really matter how many passengers there are, the cholesterol. What matters is how many cars there are, the lipoproteins. And if you're in an inflamed state, if you're insulin resistant, if you have gut permeability, those lipoprotein counts go up. If you are a shift worker, I guarantee you those lipoprotein counts go up immediately. So the one thing that we do for everybody is that we look at this LDL particle count. We have a lot of people, particularly police, military, fire, that have what looks like normal cholesterol levels, but when we look under the hood, they have sky-high LDL particle count, and these are the people that suffer a cardiac event at the age of 35. The flip side, and they call this discordance. Normally, particles kind of track with the amount of cholesterol, but when people start getting insulin resistant, particularly from inflammation or sleep deprivation, then their cholesterol levels aren't necessarily super high, but their particle count is really high. There's another type of discordance, which isn't super common, but it's maybe 20% of folks. They look like they have super high cholesterol levels, and they do by normal, AMA standards, but when we look at their particle count, it's low. So what they have is instead of a car, they have a bus for that lipoprotein, and it carries a whole lot of cholesterol in it, which is actually very, very good. People who suffer an infectious event or sepsis, if they have low cholesterol levels, they actually tend to die from that infectious event. Cholesterol actually acts as part of the innate immune system and helps mitigate viral and bacterial infection. And it plays a role in mitigating cancer risk. So there's a sweet spot in there where you want enough cholesterol and lipoproteins to augment your immune system, but not so much that we're clogging up the plumbing due to pro-inflammatory events. So that's one thing that we across the board look at with blood work is the LDL particle count. We do look at it relative to like triglyceride HDL ratio, which gives us some insight into their insulin sensitivity. We do some pretty jiggy stuff. Like we look at the CBC, the complete blood count, and elevated eosinophils, which is a type of white blood cell that is normally allocated for parasitic infections. If that is elevated, we know that that person has gluten issues. And virtually everybody that we encounter have eosinophil counts that are elevated relative to what they were, say, like in the 1940s and 1950s. This is another really important thing to keep in mind. What's normal is a representation of the population going through the doors of a clinic. Everybody's fucking sick. So sickness is normal. So you really want to think about where you do your cutoffs to determine what you want to do.
Right. So that's why I was kind of going with where you're looking at number-wise specifically, since the norm now is sickness. What is it that you're seeing as being healthy?
We again, it depends. You can see a person who has relatively low cholesterol, low lipoproteins, and they're fine. You can have somebody else who has high cholesterol but moderate lipoprotein level, and they're fine also. So there's definitely a genetic spread on that, but it's really looking more at the whole picture. It's looking at family history also. You know, if somebody had, so like with me, 2 parents that died of type 2 diabetes and cardiac complications, heart disease specifically, we want to keep a tighter look at inflammatory profile, insulin resistance, and I've done some CIMTs, carotid intimal media thickness stuff, and all that stuff looks good. So, and you know, we get super deep on this. For some people, we look at thyroid is one thing that the normal range is rather huge, but we pull tighter cut points in that because we think there's a ton of hypothyroidism that's going on, and usually that's driven by, they'll call it adrenal fatigue, but we call it HPTA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis dysregulation. Traumatic brain injury, sleep deprivation can all feed into that. But then we'll look at the thyroid, and maybe we need to put that person on some sort of a thyroid medication for a period of time. More often though, we need to address the sleep, food, exercise components that are dysregulating the HPTA axis. And then we end up addressing that. But like, I was a great example with that when they first checked my lipoprotein count. Normally you want to count this around 1,000. Mine was 2,700, which they were basically like, we're going to inject you with statins right now. And I was like, wait, I had a blood test a year ago, and this was not, it was a fraction of that. I had just gotten off my book tour, and I also just wrapped up the iCaveman Discovery Channel show, and I was a wreck. And I looked at my thyroid, and I was like, dude, my TSH is high, my reverse T3 is all messed up and everything. So we addressed my adrenals. I didn't go out on the road for a long time, got my thyroid normalized. And then when we rechecked, my LDL particle count was 1,100. So I cut, and theoretically in the literature, you can't get changes like that, but we do that type of stuff all the time. But that's what the whole City Zero thing is about, is trying to sort people and then use this computer learning, algorithmically driven process to be able to sort people through this and then find a risk assessment and have sleep, food, exercise, gut biome recommendations to try to right the ship and get them going in the direction they want. Yeah.
Can I tag in on that? Levi brought up an interesting point. I have a good friend who is a games athlete. She's hypothyroid, so it's treated with Synthroid, but also just recently did a whole bunch of, in the wake of Power Athlete doing the genetic tests, she jumped on, did the genetic stuff, was waiting on the results, but just did some blood work and found out that her leukocytes, white blood cell count, was extremely low. So I'm wondering if there's a correlation between hypothyroid, leukocyte, white blood count being super low, and her ability to recover from her training. We're talking about mega training sessions here, AM, PM sessions, 7 days a week.
Does she seem to be recovering well? Like, is she making progress over time? Does she have sleep disturbances?
At this point, I'm sorry?
Good question.
I think she's just hypo. Treated with Synthroid, but continues to, the dosage from the endocrinologist continues to get creep up. And so I'm just curious, her inability or maybe even her level of training, the volume of training that she's on, is something that is impacting her white blood cell count, impacting her recovery, and if there's any correlation there with the thyroid.
Definitely training can negatively impact the thyroid itself. So like if she has any ability to produce thyroid, cortisol antagonizes the production of thyroid. It antagonizes the conversion of T4 into T3. And I forget how it's an anabolic agent, so it's got to feed into white blood cell count. But I'm guessing about that. Like I don't remember that stuff. But I mean, it makes sense, and it's cryptic that the dosage is creeping up. Yeah. So I am unable to answer your question truthfully about whether or not it's driving the low white blood cell count. I will say this, what's interesting though is that if people are generally eating this kind of paleo-esque type diet, their white blood cell counts look low because they're not hyperinflamed. All that stuff we were talking about with reducing inflammation. One of the first signs that you see is like there are significant 15 to 20% lower across the board in white blood cell presence relative to the general population because their inflammation. Yeah.
Sure. I'm just trying to be.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the volume and intensity necessary to compete in the CrossFit Games. Going back to like the selection process for like the SEALs, I think you're going to find that the people who succeed at that over the long haul, they have a genotype that is really well accustomed to dealing with a massive amount of volume, and they just break later. They can still break, but they break later. And then you'll see the people who are kind of middle ground on that. And you may still be able to find people who can do well, but man, their periodization needs to be spot on. They need to do something like a HRV, heart rate variability testing. And if they got an orange day, it's a foam roll stretch, put on the meditation app versus doing another burner. Yeah.
Harry, what's up? So we've been talking a lot about genetic composition, and something that I'm blessed with is I have older clients that are a little bit more knowledgeable, and they stay with us for a while. And now they're hitting the plateau of like, okay, the generic solution that we have for everybody is not working for me. So individualization.
You mentioned the 23andMe, which I've done for me and my family. My son is in the spectrum, autism spectrum. And then I think John mentioned
fitness genes.
Fitness genes.
Mm-hmm.
Before the FDA found out that these people were telling people how to cure themselves and got involved, now that there's all these regulations and what type of testing, is there anything you have that you're like, all right, once you get your genetic composition and your makeup, and once you get your blood work done, and you have all these solutions, all these problems that you can actually address earlier, is there any way you look for? I mean, obviously, we don't have the resources that you do, but what do you recommend to the average Joe who is like looking to address that through genetic composition?
Functional, but before that, I would ask: are they sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night? And if it's no, then they've got to do that. Are they eating a 100% gluten-free paleo type diet? If not, then you got to do that. Like, to me, those are just the gimmies. That if there's any variance on that, like that's the low hanging fruit. Like, that's where we're going to get the most benefit, like just the sleep and really buttoning up the diet. If those things are totally buttoned up and we're still trying to motor forward, I would actually look at androgen testing, maybe even before genetic testing, testosterone, total and free testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, maybe doing a growth hormone analysis, which gets a little bit deeper into things. People, again, who have suffered a traumatic brain injury tend to not produce growth hormone. So I would do more androgen testing first versus the genetic testing. And then I might layer on the genetic testing. 23andMe still gives you some good information, but what you can do with 23andMe, you can go to a website called promethease.com. And you can, and you dump your data into that, and then the Promethease, you can go kind of like gene by gene, and it gives the analysis that 23andMe used to give, and it costs like $5. Promethease, like ASE. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
SB.
Actually, I had a question for you back there. You said HRV. Just ask your thoughts on HRV. What your thoughts were.
So HRV is heart rate variability. It was really deeply studied in like Eastern Bloc, Soviet scene, and apparently with astronauts or cosmonauts or whatnot. And the heart beats not at a metronomic pace, like 1 beat per minute. There's chaos mathematics to it. It speeds up and slows down. I'm probably going to get this backwards, but if you are well trained and have an appropriate load of stress in your person, while at rest, you have high variability in the heart, and then while in activity, you have low variability in the heart. And when you get stressed out or overtrained at rest, you have low variability, and then while under training, you have high variability in the heart rate. So what it tells you is it kind of gives you this sense of what's called allostatic load, which is total stress load, and it's kind of slick in that it's indiscriminate as to what that stressor is. So we'll find that if people eat too much carbohydrate, if they get a gluten dose, their heart rate variability will be negatively impacted. If they do too hard of a workout, their heart rate variability will be negatively impacted. So it's beneficial in that it's giving you an overall stress picture. It's tough, and it becomes a little bit of tea leaf reading because you're like, I don't know, okay, so you're red today. What did we do that got you to red? And sometimes you're like, I have no idea. Like there's nothing super quantifiable in that regards. But it's again, it's not a completely if A then B. There's definitely some interpretation to it. You need to work with a number of people and kind of see some patterns with it for it to really be meaningful. But it gives you some great feedback about like, are you good to go today for a hard training session? Or you can think about like if you're doing an accumulation block, it's like we had an orange day, red day. It's like, okay, we'll back off a little bit, get them back down to orange, then do another hard training day because we know the next week is going to be a massive curtailment in volume, and that's where we get our super compensation period. So it can really help with like a peaking event for sure. And Joel Jamieson, 8 weeks out, like he's had huge success with this with his MMA fighters, and he's super good at interpreting that stuff. And he fought me on the gluten intolerance deal, like epic fight on that stuff. We've spoken at a number of different gigs. And I'm like, are you seeing this pop up on HRV? And he's like, yes. It was a shit fight because he just didn't want to acknowledge it. But I'm like, dude, I guarantee you that's affecting people's HRV. Yeah.
And we were talking about, like adrenal fatigue and all those things. What's like supplementation? Do you look into like max adrenal or dynamic nutrition at all?
I love a lot of these adaptogens. Yeah. The interesting thing about them though is you can't continue living like an asshole and have them fix things. And that's kind of the thing where it's like, are they really helping? Or is it just that you're like, it'll help, it will buffer. But if you've dug yourself into that like HPCA axis dysregulation, you just gotta take a step back, or it's just gonna auger in worse and worse. And it's a really horrible downward spiral because as that allostatic load increases, your gut becomes more permeable. As your gut becomes more permeable, you absorb nutrients less and you're more pro-inflamed, which means that your thyroid gets dysregulated. And because you're inflamed and insulin resistant, then that's a stress. And that's where like this have you guys ever seen a video of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge? It's this old suspension bridge. So imagine a suspension bridge and the wind would blow over it and it would kind of wiggle a little bit. And one day the wind blew over it just right where it got resonance in it and the thing just like exploded. And that's the way I kind of, mentally picture folks when they've reached that overload on the training or the nutrition or whatever. The body will adapt, fail. And the failure is like what we call like stage 3 adrenal fatigue, where the person can't get out of bed. They take some years potentially to recover from that. It's massive overreaching, overtraining.
It's not a problem until it's a problem.
Yeah, man. Once it's a problem, it's digging yourself back out, and it's not dissimilar from heat stroke, where once you've been exposed to it once, your likelihood of succumbing to it again is much higher. Yeah.
No.
You said you were not a big advocate on having like high glycemic carbs post workout. That's a main idea to take. And instead of having like starches or low glycemic carbs post workout, can you develop that idea?
Yeah, I was talking to some folks at the break a little bit about this. What I've been playing with is actually doing things more like lentils, sweet potatoes that have a longer, more gentle insulin response. And I've been really liking the results with that. So we're still, say, doing 100 or 150 grams of carbs post-workout, but it's just in a form that is not massively spiking blood glucose.
Wouldn't that actually spike post-workout in the sense at all?
I don't know. Like we've been told by mainly the supplement industry that that's definitely what we want to do. But there's only now been some decent compare and contrast of doing some low glycemic load carbohydrate post-workout versus the high glycemic load. And it's just something that I would throw out there to play with. Like, I don't have the right answer with that. And from today, what would you guys take away from the low glycemic load versus high glycemic load story? What would your intuition be on that? Probably depends on the person. Yeah.
Try it out.
Shocker, shocker. It'll probably end up depending on the person, their unique circumstances. But I think that the one crack in the wall for me with that is that the orthodoxy is that you must do, like if you're not doing high glycemic load post-workout carbohydrates, that you're really missing out on something. I've seen some great anecdote in the beginnings of some good research that indicates maybe some low glycemic load carbs, not going low carb, but just, not being so focused on spiking the insulin as being the driver with that. And there's some interesting studies in amino acids specifically where they did so protein can be insulinogenic also, and branched chain amino acids, lysine can be very insulinogenic. And there were some studies comparing recovery based off of nitrogen balance, high insulinogenic protein intake versus low insulinogenic protein intake, and there really wasn't a difference between them. And that's some of the stuff where I start wondering about that. But again, if we have a CrossFit Games athlete who's doing multiple, it really depends. So do we have a CrossFit Games athlete doing multiple sessions per day, and their muscle glycogen is a critical factor of both their performance and recovery. The central governor is sampling the system, trying to figure out, well, how much glycogen do we have? We have inadequate, so that means we're going to start responding in a stressful fashion versus we have adequate glycogen recovery, and so our allostatic or stress load is going to go down. So again, it becomes really, who are you? What are we talking about? So if we had a CrossFit Games athlete doing 3 sessions a day, we probably want to keep those high glycemic carbs in the mix, almost regardless, because we just don't have time to be able to refeed them that quickly. But we don't have a ton of folks that at least that I work with that train like that. Yeah. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I'd say I was thinking on or wondering if there might be any special concern regarding having provoking that insulin spike.
I would have huge concern with that, given our dyslipidemic, insulin-resistant, sleep-deprived population.
For healthy people, of course.
I don't know. Like healthy person is really nebulous for me these days. Like you have a remarkable number of endurance athletes that end up type 2 diabetic. And they're lean, but they're motoring along, and they're a carbohydrate field. Tim notes. I mean, it's a long list of folks that were high-level endurance athletes, like Ironman top 10 finishers, and they're either type 2 diabetic or they were right on the verge of type 2 diabetic. And you look at them and they're like, dude, they're as fit as can be, but metabolically they were broken, under the hood.
And that kind of goes back to what our last guest on the podcast, Dr. Willie, had to say is like, just because you look healthy doesn't mean you are healthy. And, a lot of his approach was looking under the hood to see, all right, regardless of body composition, let's see how his whole system of tests is reacting with you. And then he makes those changes, and it may not be a body composition deal, maybe a performance deal, or.
Well, he also is interesting in that he works with pro bodybuilders. So, by far the most unhealthy population on the world, just from the mere fact of the drugs and like what they do. And actually, it's not necessarily the drugs, because powerlifters and other athletes take those too, but it's actually the bulking and the leaning, the working themselves down to 3-4% body fat, water depletion. And we talked offline, it's like that's what's really killing these guys is diuretics and that kind of deal. But going back to Robb's thing on the carbohydrates is it's a totally shot in the barrel unless you have a glucose meter. And I know Robb and I talked about this years ago, but Tom Incledon will show up. We'll get into this a lot. You should ask him that question.
I mentioned the 80.
Yeah. So he gave me when I went to him, he said, "Hey, I want you to get this glucose meter. I want you to test it first thing in the morning, and I want you to test it 15 minutes after each meal. And I want you to get a baseline on how things react to you. And if you can keep your blood sugar under 80, you will never gain an ounce of fat." And I was like, all right. So I remember you guys were talking about slow versus fast acting carbohydrates. White rice spiked me through the roof. Sweet potatoes put me through. Targo did not spike me as much as a white potato. So people don't really know what necessarily spikes them. They just have these like arbitrary, like, oh, these are fast acting carbs, or these are high glycemic carbs based on somebody else's observation. And we already know that the glycemic index.
And that goes back to this cell paper, which I'll John remind me, and I'll forward it to him, and then he'll forward it on to all you guys.
I think you already have it.
Okay, like it was fascinating because there was just no consistency, like things that you would assume were very high glycemic index. Not everybody responded in a high glycemic index and response format, and things that you would guarantee were low glycemic index and insulin load. Other people, they just went off the Richter on it.
And then Tom gave me a whole battery of different things that I could combine with meals to make sure that the blood sugar didn't go too high. Like for me, it was cinnamon, alpha-lipoic acid. There was a couple things that I could do, we got to the point where I was testing it all the time, and I came to this baseline, which was interesting. Was I was always high blood sugar in the morning. So when I first woke up, I was really high. As soon as I ate, my blood sugar would go down like 30 points. And then the rest of the day, my blood sugar was always under 85, 90. And even when I ate, it really never went up that high. But first thing in the morning, I was always high. And part of the reason probably was either some sleep apnea or something was affecting my sleep. So I was always in an inflamed state. But going back to what you were asking about it, like how high are the spikes and what's really good? We know anything over 140 starts having cellular degeneration. And you guys have all heard me tell the story about the kid who with the chocolate cake. And, the fact that, both of his parents, his aunt was blind in one eye, and, I'm looking at his blood sugar, it's 137, and, anything over 140 is or a degeneration of the optical nerves. So think about every time you hit something, it goes 140, even though it's doing this all day. You know, I mean, is it causing some form of problem? And then are you getting into some form of inflammation? And the other thing that I really focus on too, especially with carbohydrates, is gut health. And it is the weirdest thing to me. And I always think, like, if I'm eating something and it's bloating me out to the point where I'm like, I feel like I got a waddle everywhere, that's a problem. And I know that that's causing something within me. And so when we get into this whole kind of carbohydrate, like what's good, I'm always like, you know, what doesn't, like, if I can sit down and eat 7,800 grams of carbohydrate and I feel fine, I'm good. If I eat 75 grams of carbohydrate and I feel gut bloat, like we ate that Mexican food yesterday, and I was so bloated. But yet I can take 75 grams of Targo, white rice. We found this like quinoa that's mixed with like rice, kind of cream of rice, and works really well. And so I started kind of playing and looking at different things. And that goes back to my other favorite question, what about quinoa? And we get that one all the way. And I'm going to go with Fisher. Fisher had probably the best line I've ever heard, which is somebody asked him, or one of our guys asked him about mushrooms, and said, I've never seen anybody obese from a diet of just mushrooms. I don't think you're okay. And he said it, and I was like, bing, that's going in the seminar. But, you know, it's like, you know, if somebody's asking about quinoa and that's what they want to do, I mean, at the end of the day, like, when you substitute quinoa in, is everybody going to be inflammatory? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of how you fit it. You eat it, and then you get terrible gut health. Like, I don't have any problem with oatmeal. My wife eats oatmeal, and all of a sudden she's like, oh my God, my hands are swollen, I have problems. So I think, you know, it goes back, but I think if, and you guys should ask Inky about it when he comes in, the blood testing thing is one of the most interesting things to see how things react to you. And Rob made a good point about, you know, protein being extremely insulinogenic. I knew that when I ate upwards of 100 grams of protein, my insulin would go through the roof. So, you know, I mean, that's a lot of food, but is that from the protein or the fact that your gut expands? Which also feeds it. Yeah. Another thing, you have taste buds. So even if you said something sweet doesn't have carbohydrate, what happens? What sugar goes up? So gut stretch, tasting something sugar. So, I mean, there's other ways. That's why I meet people all the time. It's like, I drink diet soda, but yeah, I'm still having problems and I'm in a diabetic issue. And you're like, well, yeah, so you're constantly flooding yourself with sweet things, and your body's way sharper than we get credit for. But that overextension, and those of you guys that are trying to bulk, actually you have to eat to the point of stomach extension, because that's, I mean, you know, that was one of our little things when, you know, we looked at like, is it easier to eat like 6 or 7 different meals or eat like 3 or 4 bigger meals? And we actually found that 3 or 4 bigger meals were better for the bulk, because you almost got that stomach distension if you're doing insulin levels. So.
Bingo.
So I got it's a 2-part question. I don't know my car a little bit, so I'm not a strength and conditioning guy. But I have a theory in that we should feed our kids like we feed athletes, and that just like an athlete, they're in a constant state of rebuilding and adaptation. Is that true? And also the second part is, aside from the overarching parameters, non-inflammatory food, whole or nutrient-dense whole foods, are there other considerations you should have when feeding your kids?
Man, I mean, one, I think our genetic norm is that we're all athletes. Like, we're genetic, you know, the phenotypic norm for humans is to be very, very active. So I think all kinds of good things happen when we have an aerobic base and we exercise and, you know, all that type of stuff. So I think all of us should be eating a nutrient-dense diet, you know, that supports that process. I mean, the demands for kids are not really too much different than us, other than, you know, clearly they're growing at a accelerated rate. I don't know, like I would say that it's even more important to try to mitigate gut irritants in kids for a host of reasons. I don't know.
So I always think about kids who are in this positive nitrogen, positive nitrogen retention, this idea of constant growth, you know, which is what we all strive for putting on muscle. And yeah, I mean, obviously they're going to need, you know, some form of protein. I think any kid that's eating a diet that lacks protein is going to be, you know, left behind. I mean, I read a pretty interesting book called Deep Nutrition, and they talked about, you know, kids, you know, jaws forming and, you know, teeth and a lot of these things. And so you look at, like, you know, and bringing in some form of saturated fat, whether it be, you know, bone or, you know, something really nutrient dense like that. Because you think about it, if you look at standard diets for most kids, what do they eat? It's usually low fat, low to moderate protein, and then super high carb, and it's usually very, very sugary carbs. You know, dino nuggets and it's gluten, and this is what I want. And anybody that's ever been on an airplane with a bunch of kids who've been to Disneyland knows what high dose sugar does to kids. I was on an airplane and I was sitting there, we had the luxury or disluxury of traveling, if that's even a word, sitting there, and this lady is feeding her kids a Starburst, like this little kid, 2 years old, like, okay, if you're good, I'll give you another Starburst. And this kid's gobbling Starburst. And then it was like, here's a Coke, and the kid's like slamming this Coke, and I'm sitting there watching this. I'm like, God, Starburst and Coke for a 2-year-old.
Good luck.
This is going to be epic. We get on the plane, and the kid's like 4 seats ahead of me. And all of a sudden, he gets on, and I see him like ball up his little fist as he's standing on the seat. And it's like, ah! And he's literally screaming. So what does the mom do? Gives him another Starburst. This kid screamed nonstop for 4 hours. And I wanted to go over and choke the parents. And it happens to us. Halloween, we take our kids out trick or treating, and my wife is like the candy governor. She takes everything and doles them out. We M&Ms and a couple little things. And dude, I'm not kidding you. We don't feed our kids much sugar. They absolutely melted down. Every kid there was in this panic, because it's they just aren't absorbed to it and or really affected. So I think you got to limit that. But at the end of the day, the kids should eat what the parents eat. And this kills me all the time. We have this dope meal, and all of a sudden, mom's over there cooking up fish sticks, dino nuggets, and here's a bunch of ketchup. And, that doesn't, we have a deal in our house, we cook, and if you don't want to eat your food, that's fine. You can go to bed, and you'll wake up hungry and you'll eat at some point. When it's just this, there's some treats that you can't be complete weirdos. You got to give them some ice cream and a couple things. But I think for those kids and really forming, and it's even more important. And then, like Tom said, Rob said, setting that gut environment, which I think most parents don't realize how badly they mess up their kids' guts with antibiotics. And the other one is constantly washing your hands. Have you ever seen moms that are covering their kids in Purell? And I'm like, dude, I got mad at my wife and don't let them go out and eat the dirt. Let them play. Let them go out. I want them exposed to this stuff. So my kids are rolling around on the dog pillows with the dogs licking their faces, and I'm good. But also, I know it's kind of weird because kids are constantly hands in their nose and their face, but allowing that stuff, and then really the antibiotics. I know we really got tweaked on with this through Chris Kresser because both our girls were breech C-section babies. And you guys have listened to Chris or different other people. Really, as the baby comes through the birth canal, that's really their first experience to bacteria. And actually, the bacteria that they get for their gut is custom designed for them as they leave the birth canal. So children that are born C-section don't have that opportunity. So we knew that there was no way the girls were going to flip. So I hit up Chris Kresser, and he sent us some high dose antibiotics. And we were in the hospital. Imagine the doctor flipping out as I'm trying to shovel this stuff in my 1 day old baby's mouth. And we really worked I think we've only given them antibiotics maybe once or twice, just trying to, almost this feel we got to try to make up for it. But even fermented foods, try to offer them some different things, whether it's sauerkraut, kombucha. We fed them a fermented, was the goat milk, it's the kefir. So we fed them kefir, after the breast milk for a year, and just really trying to work for it. But really what I think it goes back to is the kids aren't any different than you. If you wouldn't eat it, then I wouldn't feed it to them. I don't want to eat dino nuggets and fish sticks and a bunch of other crap. And then the other one too is we lied to our kids really bad, and they're gonna hate me when I'm older. But I'm I don't know what that is. They're probably allergic to it. And they see kids eating Cokes and all these other foods, and they were really excited because these kids have these snackable, lunchable, things you peel open and it's all prepackaged stuff. I'm it's all gluten. So they assume gluten is this boogeyman. It's gonna.
Well done.
But my daughter actually got somewhere, either ate something, and this is a terrible story, but as parents, you guys will laugh. So she's in the bathroom, and it sounds like she's a college kid that's been eating beer and pizza for a week. And she yells at her sister to come hold my hand. This is really hurting. And so her sister's in there holding her hand going, don't worry, we'll get through this. And I'm literally sitting outside the door laughing hysterically, trying to video it, trying to record it. Because she's 3 years old and she's got her sister in there. And then they come out, she's that gluten stuff, bad gluten. And so they assume that gluten is
the devil.
Yeah, it's the devil. It's bad gluten. And at some point they're going to figure it out. But really the, having kind of gone down this, epigenetics is really what your grandparents, if your grandparents were immigrants, strong, hardy people, you got a good chance to get through this stuff. But you start looking at like, genetic adaptation and really what kind of gene expression, a lot of the stuff gets set to about 6 years old, that first 6 being such an important year. So I feel if I could lie to them and like feed them what I really want up into the age of 6, like at some point, like if I can safeguard that, I feel like as a father, I've really done my deal. And then my other responsibility that Rob and I talk about as a father is like Chris Roxon. Got to keep the daughter off the pole. So, any others? Ingo, did that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
I'd like to get into.
Last question. Sorry, it has something to do with anything you might have spoken before. Just wondering if you were thinking on releasing any kind of certification or nutrition course.
I've been working on it for 4 years. So the City Zero Gig.
It was actually supposed to be a 3-month project 4 years ago, and I was like, hey, what about that?
Yeah. So I was working on a cert, kind of like my view on this stuff, evolutionary medicine. It was going to be credentialed through the EVO Society, Evolutionary Studies Society, through the State University of New York, SUNY. And then I ended up in Reno. And have you guys heard the Reno risk assessment story? Not that many people. Okay, so I ended up in Reno. Really quick story with it. These guys had found 35 police and firefighters at high risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, put these guys on a paleo diet, modified their sleep as best they could, got them exercising better, and based off their blood work changes and their health risk parameters, it's estimated that this pilot study saved the city of Reno $22 million and a 33-to-1 return on investment. So I was trying to figure out how to scale this brick and mortar clinic to be able to accommodate folks. Like I did a few blog posts on this, and we had an oil company in Qatar, that the 3 chief medical officers that oversee the 32,000 employees out in the oil field, these guys are totally into paleo, totally into John's work and everything. They wanted to send us 32,000 people to work with remotely. This brick and mortar clinic has a technology infrastructure that would have been cutting edge in 1985. So we're completely unable to accommodate this stuff. We had New York Police Department, 24,000 employees want to use this. Again, we couldn't scale this thing. So I was trying to polish this turd, and then finally I realized that what we needed to do was create a technology company that could algorithmically sort and process the information that we had learned in the clinic, use that intellectual property, and build a technology interface that we could put 100,000 people a day through it. So that's what I've been doing. We're very, very close to our seed funding round, and we will have a certification that will encompass fitness professionals, allied healthcare providers, and physicians on one side. So we're building a provider network on one side, and then the blood work and analysis on the other side. And the goal with this thing, like currently, when people get blood work, you're typically more confused after the blood work than before. When you get the blood work through this thing, if we have not shit to bed on it, you will go through the process, you'll go through the online modules that tell you what's going on, and you will actually be well informed on this, and you don't need to call me or call John or somebody to be able to interpret this. Or conversely, your clients won't be shaking you down and like, what does this all mean? Like, they will understand and will have actionable material related to sleep, food, exercise, gut biome that they can do to, take them, who are they, what do they want to do? So that's what I've been doing for 4 years, and we're like this close to getting it done. So the whole thing, when I discovered this risk assessment program in Reno, I realized that the cert was really important, but what we need is a system, not just a cert. So we need to provide, like consistently what we find out, there's all kinds of people that are outside the parameters of wellness monitoring, and they're in a disease management state, and they need a gym and they need a doctor that they can be referred to, that the gym and the doctor are not going to drop the ball on this.
And I think that was our big, when we were in Lutheran when we started talking about this. We were on a trip to Bahamas. I'll send you a picture of yesterday. It's funny. So we sit down, and Rob made a great point. He said, we understand one model in terms of, let's say, like a CrossFit gym, somebody walks through your door, and what's the standard protocol you're going to put them through? Hey, how are you? Are you a healthy individual? You walked in here, great. Let's go 3, 2, 1, 10 rounds city and see how you do. And that's really the model we've been taught. But unfortunately, what if, a doctor or provider sends this person to you and says, hey, this person has X, Y, and Z wrong, and, this is what we're doing with them. We need to introduce them to fitness to whether or not, you define fitness. I mean, I think I've researched and I found well over 100 definitions of fitness. Every PhD that's ever written anything within the performance health field has actually started with their own definition of fitness. So if anybody tells you that nobody defined fitness, it's crazy. It was defined within it, this idea of, your ability to go out into the world and live your life in a manner that's both, to do what you want, not, confined. So based on that, basically getting people to fitness and helping them evolve into a person that's able, healthy, strong, be able to play with their kids and do all these things and live a long, healthy life. If they have all these, cards stacked against them that Robb's able to kind of assess with all this risk assessment and brings them in and sends them to your gym, that's good information for you to have. And more importantly, do you guys, show of hands, do you feel comfortable working with those individuals? Yeah, you guys do. And it's because why? We teach this idea like it's all progression. You bring them in day one, and what do? We assess, right? We put them through a battery of test assessments. You just don't fucking toss them into the fly. I mean, we did. I know Robb did. And back in the day in 2007, 2008, we'd fucking come in, 3, 2, 1, fuck you, let's go. We can torture people. But what happens? I had a guy that had AFib that didn't tell me. I put him on kettlebell swings, and all of a sudden he shows me his watch that has his heart rate monitor, and he's at like a 220, and the guy's 60 years old. And I didn't know if I should like push him outside, shut the door, and run, like hug him. I didn't know what to do. And at that point, I realized that, if somebody walks through your door, I mean, our 3 Ps when we talk about coach responsibility, what is it? Your number one, do no harm. It's the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. So as individuals, we are in a position, owning a gym, doing this, to do harm if not applied correctly. And so, it would be nice to actually have these people come through your door recommended, whereas you got an email or an information being like, hey, this is what this person, these are the problems they have, and you feel comfortable dealing with them. They're working with this individual for their health and nutrition. This is what we need for them. And, Harry, I'll keep looking at you, but you're great working with these special populations, bringing people in, day one, what can we do today? I mean, my very first client was 5'6", 310 pounds, had been a terrible overeater, had all these problems. And we bring her in, and day one, her workout looked like banded, like face pulls, 5 step-ups on a box, and like 25-meter row. I mean, and like that's where she started. And she did it 3 times and was literally had to go out in the car and sit with the AC on it for 20 minutes. So I mean, how do you scale this thing? And I think it's not always about increasing human performance, but I think that's the stuff we geek out on. It's actually helping people to live the life that that they need to live so that they're healthy people. And,
let me throw something in on that. I've been kicking this term around called, or it is the gym as primary care medicine. The doc in the box isn't primary care medicine. The doc in the box is when we have fucked something up and we miss something, or you get hit by a bus, or you get something that you need antibiotics for. But what do we get in the gym? We potentially get education on sleep, food, exercise, and we get community. And those are all the things that we need to be effective as human beings. And this is, there's been drama around like some of my commentary about the way that gyms need to be run. But the reason why I fucking care about it is every gym that fails is a hub of benefit that ceases to exist. These gyms can and will save people's lives. So I'm pretty motivated to try to see people succeed in this process, because I don't think we need the doc in the box. I don't think we need the healthcare system. I think we need a decentralized food production system that networks into gyms so that if oil goes to $300 a barrel, we're not completely screwed, because our normal systems are all fucked up. This is a contiguous, decentralized, difficult to destroy system that you guys are basically at the front lines of that. And that's why I'm incredibly passionate about trying to see you guys succeed on the business side, on the nutrition side, on the coaching side, because I think that you will save more lives than any doctor, firefighter, priest, rabbi, or what have you. You guys are going to affect a remarkable number of people. So that's why I'm really passionate about that.
We have a responsibility to surround ourselves with people that are better than us. In my case, I have a massage therapist, I have a chiropractor that not only they know my business and my people, but they know my vision and what we strive for. So when I send somebody to get, hey, I kind of have a tweak, and I'm like, hey, go see this. Well, I have my own chiropractor. I'm like, well, you're missing a whole pie, because you go to my guy assesses you and gives you a protocol, and then he calls us like, I saw so-and-so, and this is what I need you to do for you. Because I don't have the knowledge base that he has at 25 years experience in your chiropractor.
Well, there's a problem we run into, and really what kind of ran me down this road was, obviously playing the NFL, there's a lot of injuries. And every time that we got injured, it was either a pill or surgery. And I'm thinking to myself, there has to be something else. And that actually, you guys can wave and say, Dr. Tom's in the back. My good friend Tom Incledon just walked in. It actually led me to meet Dr. Incledon. And, Tom being like, no, that's all bullshit. And Tom was actually in med school and left to go be a research scientist because he realized that the side of research was where he was going to help athletes, and then just learning what somebody else was regurgitating within a medical book, which was, surgery or a pill, which to me is just like, hey, I'm either going to replace your part or I'm going to put, electrical tape over your check engine light. Had to be, had to, be this. And Tom is, has such a clinical background of like having worked with people that they were like, I write this person off, they're going to die in a week. And Tom's like, awesome, bring them over, we figure this stuff out. And I'm sure he'll get into it a lot more. But really, it took me down that road. And even at like my darkest moment, where I thought my whole world was coming to an end with a shoulder and a knee, and I called Tom, and he's like, I know this guy. Get him up on this guy. We went and visited Dr. Bueller up in Utah, and I walked out of Dr. Bueller's office, and it was as if somebody gave me my life back. Like I was like, they told me I need a shoulder replacement, knee replacement. I went and I saw Bueller, and Bueller's a real interesting guy. I mean, he's in Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body book, and they call him Dr. Two Fingers. Just what he does is a different type of deal. I can't even explain it for those of you who have seen him. And I literally walked out of there, and as I was walking out, the only thing I thought to myself is I could run through that car. I could go back to play today if I had met him years before. And, but I really believe that everything happens in your life for a reason. And even though I wouldn't say I'm a religious person, I'm a spiritual person, I don't believe this stuff's a big. And, you meet people at the right time. And, thank God I didn't meet him earlier, because I would still be playing in the NFL.
And then what would I be doing? That's the real question.
My poor friend Robb Wolf would be like, John's drooling a lot, this and that. And it's a scary thing for me because, my good friend Kyle Turley, who lives out in Riverside, comes and visits us, and he's got a lot of problems and played as long as I had. And as we sat down and started looking at some of the things that I did versus what he did, he didn't go see a Dr. Tom. He didn't start eating gluten-free diet because Dr. Tom did his food analysis and told me I was allergic to gluten, corn, and soy, and a few other things. And I just cut those out of my diet. I remember asking Tom, I'm like, so if I just eat all the green foods and none of the red foods, I'll be fine? He's like, yeah, it's easy. And he gave me a whole list, and I just ate those foods. And then next year I was bigger, stronger, and more jacked. And I called him back. I was like, dude, I dropped like 5-6% body fat. My list was through the roof. And Tom's like, reduce inflammation, buddy. Let's go. And so, it's not that complicated, but I remember talking to guys in the NFL about it and them fighting me. Still to this day. When I went and saw Dr. Amen, and at the end of my NFL career, and they assessed me with some brain damage, which actually they assessed my ability to sympathy and empathy as being 0, which now I realize is our genetic trait. But the part of my brain that was damaged on my left frontal lobe, I leave that place and I'm pretty upset. I'm like, dude, I got brain damage, and I call Matt Lalonde, Dr. Lalonde, organic chemistry professor at Harvard, and I tell him, and Lalonde's like, let me work on this. I'll call you back. So he wrangles up all of his monkeys, and they pull 10,000 research studies. And he literally 3 days later calls me back, and I'm like, what? I was going to get a call back. He's like, no. I had all my guys go through it, and there was a bunch of great information about ketogenic diets in terms of how to help brain and acute versus chronic brain injury. And he's like, ketogenic diet. All right, let's go. Well, I was like, I'm already familiar with that through Mara Davis School. And it was easy to switch, but then for a year I didn't eat any carbs. And, it really was pretty damn hard. I went and visited Robb at the end of the year, and I remember Robb was like, let's go get some sweet potatoes. I think you're good. And sure enough, we cooked up all the sweet potatoes. So I laid back, and it was like somebody wrapped me in a warm blanket. And I woke up and I drove home and I felt way better. But I think, the network of people that you create, whether it's a Robb, Matt Lalonde, or Dr. Tom, Dr. Bueller, all these people, is an incredible network that I feel blessed to have access to. And I think the problem is most people are so stuck in this conventional dogma of like, well, I got to go see the doctor, and he's going to give me this, and I need surgery and all this. And I got to the point where I was like, you guys have already cut on me enough to the point where it didn't make me better. You giving me, I broke my leg first game of the season against Tennessee. Shattered my fibula clean in half, and they casted me 5 days, and I played 3 weeks later. They told me I didn't need that bone to play football because it was only 12% weight bearing bone. So I'm out there playing on a broken leg, and I can feel it moving with every step. And so the doctor just started giving me more and more painkillers. He's like, "Why don't I just give you something else to pick you up?" And I was like, so now we're just masking more and more problems. Would it be the problem is that I'm playing on a broken leg, and I end up going and playing 17 weeks on a broken leg, and was on John Madden's horse trailer for Monday Night Football for beating up Warren Sapp. And he's a fat piece of shit. You can put that on fucking camera. But I mean, that's
shots fired.
That's but that I think is the big problem, is that people are stuck in this conventional dogma. And I really what I'm so proud of Robb and what Dr. Fallon and these guys are doing is they are fighting conventional dogma, just like we're fighting conventional fitness and ideas. We're putting out good training opposed from just a bunch of bullshit. And if you guys see it, the internet's fraught with it. If you do a search, everybody's an expert, and there's just not that many experts. And even though everybody with the blog is, so I think at the end of the day, I always laugh, like everybody was, kind of like, I didn't know much about this paleo, and then Rob comes out, and then everybody was a paleo expert. And I'm like, dude, how was everybody an expert on this?
Because Rob started a podcast.
Because Rob started a podcast.
And the funny thing is, I know nothing, and it seems to be decreasing today. Have you guys seen very many definitive answers? What's the one definitive answer today?
You got to sleep more.
That's the only takeaway.
Sleep more. And really everything, and I think the problem we run into is everybody wants a definitive answer. So if I follow this, this will happen. And it's this kind of level of for surety, okay, well, I'm putting my trust, it has to come. And we know that, it just doesn't work like that. We had we've been doing some nutrition stuff, and we had a guy that was like, where's the diet where I can go out and booze with my buddies 5 nights a week, but I don't want to drink on the weekends?
Oh, and it has to be keto.
But it has to be a ketogenic diet. And I was like, well, how many drinks? He's like, I don't know, 3 or 4 pitchers of beer and maybe 5 or 6 cocktails. And I'm like, well, that's the alcoholic diet. So what you got to do is you got to drink enough to where you throw up all the next day, have one meal, and then get back in the fight. But he also what he wanted to drop 5 to 6% body fat, and then I was like, hey, I know what that diet's called. It's called Candyland. My kids are playing that game right now. I'll send over some. It's like, and I read this stuff, and I'm like, scratch my head a little bit, and I'm like, let's book a consult just because I want to meet this guy. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm going to give you a big dose of reality, and it's you can't have your cake and eat it too, but you can, work around to have everything kind of work if you want to make some sacrifice. There's a very, very small percentage of the population that can do whatever they want, and they will still jump 60 inches and fucking run a 4.23. And I played in the NFL with those guys. The guy that literally ate chicken McNuggets and dipped them in salt and drank Diet Coke and was still 4% body fat. But that was in his 20s. What does he look like in his 40s or his 50s?
If he makes it.
Right. It's become this interesting thing. And the reason why I remember sitting with Rob talking about this risk assessment deal, why it was so impactful. And, we talk almost every week about this for years, is because here's an opportunity to really flip the paradigm on its side and provide something of being like, you don't have to go to the standard healthcare provider kind of bullshit. And with all this, Obamacare stuff, it's even more. My deductible is now $5,000, and there's 4 people in deal on insurance. It's becoming more and more important. Like the idea of everybody should have the right to have insurance. I'm not denying that, but the problem is when you add that many more people into the pool, but you don't add a single doctor, you don't increase hospitals, and you don't do anything to regulate the insurance industry, you can't have that. You basically what you have to do is you have to throw up a sign and say, you know what, we're going to need 30% more doctors to pick up our 50% more people. I need to regulate insurance care providers. We need to regulate all this, and we need to build hospitals and have all this. If we're going to be in standardized healthcare with people that have no concept of health, fitness, or more importantly, more obligation to not weigh down the system, how can we do it? You can't. It's a broken system from day one, and everybody should have the right to healthcare. But it's if you don't create infrastructure for it, how does it exist? It doesn't, and it's become this terrible deal. We've been trying to go through it. Our healthcare provider went out of business. They just took shop and said, we're not doing it. We're done with that. We're done. And so now we're now what do we do? So then we're having to go out and look for stuff. And then it's all these people to the point where you just, let me get the cheapest one and I'll just pay cash. Let's go make a cash deal. And that's what we're going to turn into, is just a cash deal society. You basically pay the healthcare so that, or you take the fine, or you get the catastrophic where it's a $25,000 deductible and you pay the minimum, and then you just go out and you pay cash, or you hope to God you never get sick, right? Which is us, right? Because I'd rather pay, you know, like the reason we come train and we do all this stuff is like I've been sick for years. My kids don't really get sick. You know, I mean, it's really, you know, my wife's going to have a baby, so we got to, you know, have some health care. But that becomes the deal. Like these gyms and what the information we're teaching here is like, if you're depending on somebody to come save you, nobody's coming. And I wrote a talk to Johnny about that, where I'm like, you know, everybody thinks that like somebody's going to be there to their net fall, and nobody's fucking there. The doctor's not going to be there. Just a small tangent, but my dad had a TIA, which is a temporal and stroke. Yeah, you're right. So my dad had a deal and had a TIA, and they thought he was going to have a stroke, or they thought he stroked out at work. They take him to the hospital, and he's in bed, and the nurse walks in and is like, you know, your father had a stroke. And, bleed, we thought he was going to die. And so we're sitting there with my dad holding his hand, and about 6 hours later, he comes out of it, and he's like kind of normal. He's like, I don't know what happened. I got groggy, and then I hit his head real bad. And so what do? They scan him. They do everything. They look at him. He's in the hospital one day. They release him. Nothing wrong with you. You can't figure it out. So what happens? The doctor's like, you look healthy. Might be just something weird. Sends him back out. Doesn't make any changes, nothing. 3 months to the day, the exact same thing happens. And this time, he's dead. And I go in. About 6 hours later, he wakes up. Everything's fine. I looked at him. He's like, what do you think? And I'm like, you're fucking over listening to these morons. And so I go pick him up in the car, and I drive him out to Arizona to go see Tom to get all his blood work done, because we got to figure this thing out. And so we stop at a truck stop. We're filling up with gas. And my dad's like, oh, I'm going to grab a water or a coffee or something. So he comes out with the coffee, and like we're in the car, and I go for a bump, and he spills the coffee on me. And I was like, oh, it's not like coffee. It's fucking hot chocolate. And I like look at him, and I like snatch the hot chocolate out of his hand. And as I do it, a raspberry Danish falls out of his jacket. Mind you, I woke up at 3 a.m. to drive into Arizona so that we could get blood work fasted. Right? So my dad has a sweet tooth. And so I grab the shit, I pull over, and I throw the shit out, and I'm literally yelling at him. Like, a son should never yell at his father. And he's like, I can't believe you talked to me. And I'm like, I had to wake up at 3 a.m. to drive your ass over here 6 hours to go get blood work because, Mom, you almost died twice. I mean, literally, I had to sit in the hospital and talk to my mom about, Dad's will and all this and my brothers. So we drive over, and Tom starts going through his history, takes all the blood, and he goes through, he's like, taking any medications? He's like, yeah, the doctor told me I had low testosterone, so he prescribed me this testosterone for Rebel Moms. And I was like, oh, really? How can you tell me that? He's like, well, I didn't think it was a big deal. I was like, well, everything's a big deal. So we get the blood work back, and 0 testosterone in his body. So for a guy taking testosterone, that's 0 in his body. So Tom looks at him and goes, you're taking testosterone, you have no testosterone in your body. So what happened is because my dad doesn't sleep enough, he's overweight, doesn't eat right, doesn't exercise nearly as much as he should. All that testosterone he was taking was aromatizing into estrogen. What happens when estrogen gets high? It thickens your blood, and blood tends to clot. And those deals, basically the blood was clotting, and he was getting these TIAs and stroke. And literally and here was the thing when I asked him about the doctor, I was like, the doctor prescribed it. Did he ever bring me back and do a follow-up blood test to see how you've been doing? Because if he had tested you, you didn't have any testosterone, and would either give you some Arimidex or something to block estrogen. No, never brought him back for a follow-up. Gave him this drug, and then didn't bring him back to do any form of blood testing, which is the classic HRT. You basically assess somebody, you bring them back, you see how it affects them. Did nothing. And here was this drug that this doctor told my dad was safe, and almost stroked him out. And we sit there with Dr. Tom, and Dr. Tom prescribed a bunch of supplements. Do this. We're going to change your diet, exercise. Since he's done that, not a single episode. So that doctor who asked your doctor about low T on the commercial, which was my dad. Do I have low T? What do? They test him. Yes, you have low T. Here's the drug. And it almost kills him. And the big hospital we went to, the scans, all of those doctors did not know anything. And then I get in there, and when we go back to the doctor, I'm like, after we go see Dr. Calm, I go to the thing, and I'm talking to the doctor. I'm like, why didn't you test him? I'm like, you almost stroke this guy out. And the doctor's like, well, I'm like, why wouldn't you prescribe him some Arimidex or something to block it? Well, we would never prescribe a cancer drug. And I'm like, so wait a minute, you're going to prescribe him testosterone, even though he's overweight, and it's going to aromatize, and you wouldn't do anything to block estrogen? And the doctor didn't know anything about that. And I'm like, dude, a kid with a $2 internet connection can get on there and Google this stuff, or make a phone call to a guy like Tom Minkman, or just really anything. I mean, well, no, it's because a lot of this stuff isn't about, and I don't want to say all doctors are bad, but I think the problem is that they just don't know, and more importantly, stuff run by drug companies. Because hey, you know what? I'll take you to a steak dinner, and let's go play some golf if you sell a bunch of this stuff. Look how many guys, the Viagra stuff was even more interesting. Look how many guys had problems with that, taking too much, heart problems. Are you healthy enough for intercourse? I mean, so. That's just my recent interaction with conventional medicine, and why I go visit Tom twice a year and get my blood work done and do everything that way. Because for me, that's the most, guaranteed way, instead of sitting with some doctor that, I'm no longer a believer that, we put such this idea that I had to go to school for 7 years. And I'm like, dude, I went to go do a different PhD. I played in the NFL, but it's not to say I couldn't do it too, So, I mean, even my neighbor up the street, who's one of the top cancer docs in Orange County, rapping with him, just lost his mother, and or his wife's mother to cancer. And I asked him, I'm like, you guys ever done any stuff with ketogenic diets? He's like, nah, diet's not really that important with cancer. And I was like, really? Because cancer lives on sugar, so if you kind of reduce sugar, have you ever heard of Dr. Fred Hatfield or any of these people? Nothing. He's like, we work with, we usually do some home surgery and we do radiation in this, and it's like, that's all you got? Like I use the analogy, you guys have seen Armageddon, the movie, when Harry Stamper walks in, he's talking to NASA and they give him the plan. He's like, is that the best you got? You guys are NASA, you got people thinking shit up. And they're like, that's all we got. And he's like, oh, fuck.
That's slingshot around the moon.
Right? Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I saw this one, strap it. That's what I feel like a lot of times we get into this stuff. And I think it's because they're stuck within conventional wisdom, whereas, guys like Rob or, Tom or these different people are looking for different solutions. Like I wasn't joking yesterday about Tom, there isn't anything that I could ever call Tom about and he's never heard of. And if it is, he'll call me back in 3 days and then we'll make it out. So, I mean, I remember years ago, 2001, I hit Tom up, I'm like, I have cartilage problems. 10 years later, Tom is probably the most knowledgeable person in cartilage regeneration and how to fix cartilage than anybody on the planet through either supplements, stress, all these different things to stress. Well, the problem is you're too busy helping everybody else to worry about yourself. But I mean, I think that's where it comes from. You have to be able, and that's why I think we're stoked for you guys to come here, is because this is your network, this is our network, and bring people in like Rob and Tom and different people to really plug in and see this stuff from ground zero. And Rob City Zero has become so exciting for me because I don't want anybody to have to be a son to sit there with their dad and gets killed because some doctor prescribed them testosterone. This paradigm's broken. The whole thing is busted, and we're seeing it firsthand. And anybody that's in this insurance deal is seeing it, being like, I don't want to have to go to a doctor if something goes wrong. I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen.
Let me share with you guys just really quick. So this pilot study that I told you about was a previous study where they found 35 cops and firefighters at high risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. You can imagine how cops and firefighters probably eat. Not great. And these guys are borderline type 2 diabetic, bad dyslipidemia and everything. They put them on a high carb, low fat, AMA, ADA recommended diet. And you know what happened? They got worse. We have 2 years of data on that. Eventually they had to just pull it. And these guys are getting worse than the standard cop and firefighter diet. But what's cool is we have 2 years of, hey, we did it the way that you guys recommend that we do it. And these guys got worse. We have all the data points on it. And then our docs, to their credit, they just said, well, if it's not high carb, low fat, what is it? Well, we've heard of some Atkins stuff. So they started kind of Atkinsing and things got better than we've heard about this paleo stuff. So they started paleoing. And over the course of time, now they're getting into some cool functional medicine. We're looking at thyroid. We're starting to see different patterns that are emerging in this whole thing. But we did what we were supposed to do, or they did what they were supposed to do for a good 2 years and made it worse.
Well, Rob sends me I get pinged with a text that was on Twitter. It was about 3 to 6 months ago, where the FDA or the AMA comes out and it's like, yeah, saturated fat has dietary saturated fat has no effect on cholesterol. So they literally put that out. Rob forwards it to me, and he's like, wow, how long? I mean, that's huge, because for the last 50 years they've been claiming that dietary saturated fat elevates heart disease, cholesterol, all these problems. We were like, no, it doesn't. And finally they come out, and you know how much play that got? 0. There wasn't a single write-up about it. I mean, all of a sudden somebody produces a study about how meat is bad, and Robb Wolf gets 4,000 pings. He has to like go dig out his glasses. I don't know if you guys remember, Robb used to wear glasses, and my favorite, when you get all fired up, he'd like start pushing his glasses. He's gonna have to go dig up his glasses and fire up his computer. What does he do? And he's like, don't worry, I'm working on this rebuttal. And he has to fight this war every time somebody puts out something that has to do with protein and meat and like having something to do with anything. So Robb has to fight this thing, and he's like, fuck, he's like our white knight cowboy. Like bad guys come to town and they're like, go get Robb Wolf, and he comes with a hat and a 6-gun.
What's funny is like a bunch of the biblical stories, I could never wrap my head around it. Like Moses, I was kind of like, okay, so these people just saw a bunch of miracles, and this guy says to him, hey, I'm going to head up in the hills. Don't do anything squirrely, no gilded calves, no, worshiping false idols or whatever. And he comes back down and all hell is broken loose. I'm like, how does that happen? But that is the closest thing that I can say in this experience, where you have people that will write an email, you've saved my life, my kids had all kinds of problems, everything's better. And then one study comes out and they're like, is red meat going to kill me? I'm like, come on, man. Your own personal experience should be better than that. Like, your blood work is better. You look, feel, and perform better. Blood work is great. Do you need me, the false prophet, to tell you that you're fine? You're fine, and you're fine in your own experience. You don't need anybody to tell you one way or the other.
So, any more questions?
So, Robb, with the results you guys have gotten on your City Zero pilot, has that been pretty effective talking to medical professionals? I guess my question is how do you bring them over?
I don't bring anybody over. And this is true, like whether it's the interwebs or whatever, there's so much interest in this stuff in general that where we get low-hanging fruit, where somebody's already bought in, then we go to that. And you'll probably never see a standard cold call sales force with us, because we have so much interest and there's so much opportunity within just say like paleo, CrossFit, ancestral health scene. We've got 3 to 5 years of massive work that we could have a network of millions of people. I'll tell you, I usually keep the stuff under my hat. The goal is to have a network of providers, network of people in this, and then we crack open our own insurance company, and then we start bringing in hospital systems in this. And our 33-to-1 return on investment is actually conservative. We can prove that because we've done the validation studies to show that if we change blood markers in these ways, the likelihood of heart attack and stroke decrease by this much. But what else do we know if we change insulin levels? What else are we affecting? Cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, fertility, dementia, on and on and on. So the real return on investment is probably more like 200-to-1, 300-to-1. And I just have this sneaky suspicion that when you apply evolutionary biology to medicine, that we're operating with something that should have always been there, but has never been there. And the interesting thing is all the big powers that be can't pivot on a dime and adopt this. Like, there's all this stuff with like Coke funding this thing and that, so, I mean, the established systems really are not in a amenable position to adopt this. And it's actually kind of sad on one hand, but it's a huge opportunity for us on the other, because as a decentralized kind of pirate ship model, we can go in and just supplant this whole thing. I mean, it's really not that much different than what CrossFit did for fitness. There was a governing body, but really at the end of the day, it was practitioners going out and doing this stuff and doing something that was more effective and more sticky, and it built community and did all this stuff that was really great. And it's kind of like peeing in a pool. You're never going to get it out now. Like it's there forever. That impact has changed forever. So
it's a great analogy. To this day, I mean, we still get people all the time. How come you guys still work with CrossFit? Why do you guys still teach CrossFit football seminar when Power Athlete's so dope? And it's a really for us, it's going in and educating people on what we're doing. And we show up, and it's in the beginning we got a little bit of pushback from people, but today when we go teach it, like people are what they are. When I get up and talk nutrition, they know who these people are. They know what it looks like. Like nothing is really this astronomically crazy idea. Like here's the deal. I want you to eat a well-balanced diet, and I steal Dr. Tom's words, eat for color. Try to rotate your foods. Don't eat anything. Constantly looking to gather. You go to the grocery store to try to find new things to eat. Have variety. Don't eat the same thing. sleep, exercise, follow a good strength conditioning program that actually is built on progression. So if you're going to do this today, we need you to do a little bit more tomorrow, and kind of, balance and all these things. And people are like, this makes sense. I mean, in the beginning, we had to go out there and fist fight people into this. And I'm like, why are you fighting me on this? Like
legs 2 days in a row.
Yeah. I mean, I got an email the other day from that guy, from that coach,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that idea of like, how do you train similar muscle groups 2 days in a row? Like, why would an athlete do that? I'm like, yeah, because, football players don't use their legs every day.
So I definitely don't use guard daily to get to.
It's like my favorite one is Luke had a guy that was like, I'd still like to drink water. Like that whole thing. And so like everybody in the seminars like trying to find, what about lemon or whatever? And Luke's like, what would John say? And he's like, you need to grow the fuck up and drink some water.
You're a grown ass man, act like it.
Yeah. They're like being an adult. And like grown men, like Jim Windler had a great deal. It's like grown men should drink water, tea, coffee, and booze. There's really nothing else. Like if you're not, if you're adding other things, then obviously you're not an adult. And it was a pretty funny statement, because I looked at him like, I drink some iced tea, I drink coffee, and we drink water, and we drink booze. That's really it. But I mean, and the funny part is, I remember when I said it to Rob. Rob's like, there's this interesting thing about community and having a drink with your friends.
Yeah.
That's like a big part of community. And that's why at the seminar where I'm like, hey, if your friend offers you a beer, have a beer with your friends, sit down, have a drink. Like, don't be the fucking weirdo. Because I had to go to a CrossFit deal. There was a CrossFit HQ. And like, I'm over there drinking a beer and nobody was drinking. And they're like, well, we're all on this like paleo 30-day, this. And I'm like, so I'm going to sit here and drink all these beers and you guys are going to have any? So I'm like double beering, like triple beering it. And I'm like, and that goes back to that whole be weird. I'm like, you guys are all fucking weird, right? Because you know why? Because I'm always going to remember the guys that like wouldn't have a beer. And like, I was part of the deal. I mean, so a lot of like, you hear these analogies, these jokes, and these comments we make over the years, and they all are steeped in fact. Like, it's all things that have happened to us. Like that chocolate cake story, like it blows people away because that legitimately happened. And I think, we do a job of making good light of this stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, like some of this stuff's tragic, and you have to be able to look at it and be like, man, we got to reprogram this stuff. So I think it's definitely, the good fight. I always feel a little bit like, as a literary major, Beowulf, his whole deal was like fight the good fight. And like, that's what I always feel like we're doing every day. And that's why we go teach it, because it's really, a great market of people that, when you think about the people that are involved in this thing, are people that are chasing performance, want to eat real food. They already understand, the idea of actually doing compound movements. And I hate the term of functional movement. It fucking kills me, because everything's a functional movement if you can apply it to a certain function. Is bicep curl functional? Yes. You need a strong brachialis, depending on your stuff. So I mean, this idea of single joint movements are functional, right? Every movement's a functional movement if you have a function for it. So, it's been really, really rewarding, because I mean, obviously I wouldn't have met a lot of you guys if we hadn't been in the CrossFit community. I wouldn't have met any of you guys. I'd still be hanging out with Dr. Tom.
That's not a bad time, I'm told.
Yeah. Rolling frying pans at the, but you know what? It's given me a great opportunity to not only meet you guys, and then, and then you guys seeing it and being like, well, there has to be something more. And I was like, yeah, well, here's our really cool Power Athlete. That's good information. And it, and it really, I don't know if you guys knew it, but CrossFit Football started because CrossFit asked me to do it. And then I got so many emails, I was responding them, and Rob was like, there's no fucking way you're going to be able to respond to all these emails. You need to like answer one and post it up somewhere so that people can read it. And I was like, Talk to Me Johnny blog. That's how it started. And then from Talk to Me Johnny, there was a question that was like, what would CrossFit Football look like without the CrossFit? And I wrote the Power Athlete template and all that programming. And then I started getting all these emails from people being like, can you just program that? And then Luke was like, let's create a Power Athlete website. And so Luke came on board, and I was like, we're fucking in. And that's how it all started. And then that was Power Athlete. So it actually evolved from this idea of like, we were doing this little thing and people needed or wanted so much more information, because what they were doing, like they were doing the programming and they were getting great results. And they were like, well, what's the rest of the stuff? Well, I mean, it's really basic. It's like, you're going to lift heavy weights on a progression, and you're going to do short metabolic conditioning workouts that are somewhere around 7 to 9, 10 minutes, as long as 15 minutes. And you're going to do them with variety, and you kind of like program it, and you're like, wow, when I lift weights and I do short metabolic conditioning stuff, I actually get bigger and stronger. And, the other one, somebody once yelled at me in a drunken state, yeah, you ruined CrossFit. Because I actually put a periodized strength conditioning template, strength training template, mixed with metabolic conditioning. So before me, there was only one workout a day, and strength rotated in variety, and strength was just another element of fitness. And what I said is strength is the platform on which everything is built. So therefore, we prioritize strength, and you add in and you layer in metabolic conditioning and conditioning as needed, as long as it doesn't deviate from the goal of being strong. And that was a huge but. And then I did CrossFit. And then what happened? All 12,000 CrossFit gyms have one periodized strength program within their CrossFit. Maybe less than 5% of them actually follow a randomized strength program. So what happened? The market decided what people really wanted to be strong. People wanted to be powerful more than they wanted to be elite. Even though elite's excellent. But people want to be some big strong motherfuckers that kick in the wall.
Without a bench press.
Yeah. and you know, which is weird to me.
People show up to the box and they're like, oh, bench press today? Yeah.
Well, the single best accessory work for your overhead press is your close grip bench press. I mean, you know, like strong triceps you want to watch. I mean, everybody's press is stuck. I love this.
Or handstand push-ups.
My press has not gone up in 6 years. All right. So you know what the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over again, expecting a different response. So therefore, and it's like, wait a minute, what's missing from there? That's where we came up with all the primal movements and planes of movement. The horizontal push, horizontal vertical push, all that stuff came out of this idea of like, there is a base template, a blueprint that I call a human movement and human performance. And at the end of the day, like you can get as jiggy, you can go down the Ido Portal deal where you're doing all the stress and mobility and all that. That's great for somebody advanced, but at the end of the day, like somebody needs to like squat, step, lunge, pull, push, press. I mean, all these things. And once they do that, and once they're proficient in it, then we can start layering around new stuff. And it's really like doesn't seem complicated to me. But when we talk about this, or when people talk to me about their programming, I'm like, I'm taking crazy pills. It's like the dude we did a nutrition talk, and the guy, his main diet was a chocolate milkshake that he was making with raw cocoa, 7 raw eggs, and a little bit of raw milk. And he was like mixing it up and drinking this thing 4 to 7 times a day. And that was his diet. And the guy was like talking to me about how great it was. And I'm looking at the dude, and he's like super inflamed, body fat.
And we shit like a goose.
Oh, yeah. But like, I took him aside. I was like, dude, you went deep, man. Like, come back to the light, bro. And I like talked to him, and like, you know, the guy was like, this is going to be the fucking answer to human performance. It's consuming this concoction of raw eggs, cocoa, and fucking raw, like, what is it? What's the raw milk that comes the first day on the breast?
The colostrum.
Yeah. So he was buying fresh colostrum, mixing it with raw eggs and cocoa in this deal, and he had it in these and he's drinking during the seminar. And dude, the guy smelled fucking terrible. But like that's the level. And I'm like, dude, like let's take a step back. Let's figure out what the non-crazy approach is. I want you to lift some weights. I want you to condition. Like I want you to eat some real foods. Like, you know, if you're constantly consuming liquids, like, you know, you're not getting the digestion. It starts in the mouth. And I went through the whole thing. And like the guy was looking for me to okay it. And I'm like, I can't fucking okay. Like, here's the non-crazy approach. And you know, that's become like the weird thing for us is what appears to be the most normal is fought against the hardest. Being like, okay, so your leg hurts. Instead of figuring out why your leg hurts, I'm just going to give you a pill that masks the pain of your leg. And then what happens? I'm going to keep giving them to you until you're addicted. And the next thing you know, like you're like, you know, having other problems or this. I mean, you know, Kyle Turley had a hell of a problem because they were pumping full of painkillers, and then he couldn't go to the bathroom. So what do? They gave him a bunch of stuff to help him go to the bathroom. And then they gave him all these antipsychotics. And then he like gave him one where he was having problems, and then he wanted to kill himself. He was having all these issues. And like every time he went back to the doctor, they were like, "That's totally normal for you to want to kill people." I swear to God. They were like, "Yeah, that happens. Let me give you a different one. Let's see if this one works." So he's telling us a story the other day, and I'm like scratching my head. And he was to the point where he had a backpack in the back of his car, and he was just going to drive off into the wilderness and live by himself because he was nervous he was going to hurt other people. And every time we went to the doctor, they were like, well, let's just try this one. Let's change the dosage. We just have to figure out what the right blend of drugs is to help you be normal. And he's like, I don't know what that is anymore. And at that point, I'm like, dude, this is crazy. Like
he had a clear antipsychotic deficiency, and they just needed to, you know, get it to the right level, just like we all have statin deficiencies.
Yeah. And you know, and his thing is fitness. He's like, man, he goes, I broke my body, but I know I need to exercise. When I exercise, I feel normal. And he's like, I have to do something. And I was like, well, you know what? Let's come in. Let's film some offensive line stuff, and we're going to put together Power Athlete Football, which will be an online clinic for football stuff and teaching stuff. And we're going to come in and film a bunch of clinic stuff with him, and because nobody's really teaching college or a football clinic from pros like in a way that's easy, like we've used with Train Heroic, to be able to put out workouts, and we'll help him with that and like give him, you know, something that fits within this and really help him get back into it, because dude, it never ceases to amaze me, and Rob, and I'm sure Tom will get up this, the shit that I'm sure Tom 10 times a week somebody walks in where he kind of scratches his head and he's like, hold on, I'm going to call John, he's never going to believe it. And, you know, I mean, it's happened dozens of times. So I think, you know, really what I want you guys to take away from this is, you know, the conventional information isn't all you had. You guys have other resources, whether it be this or all these other things, to be able to, you know, provide the best information, whether it be performance training for that, like I was trying to win the CrossFit Games, or just somebody that's trying to reclaim their lives by trying to get a little bit of fitness, or that person that's like, you know, you can help somebody sleep an extra hour a day. I mean, you know, when I was having some issues with sleep, I mean, Tom calls me up and says, I got the CPAP machine, I should try it. So I've been sleeping on the CPAP thing, and it's actually really been helpful. And that's something I would have never thought, but here's somebody thinking outside the box for me. And it's just, you know, and at the end of the day, like, you know, you guys aren't alone in this, and this thing will only continue to grow. And my deal is to have, like, I'm going to road this thing from underground. I mean, I'm going to wear out the, you know, the pylons under the pier. We're going to collapse this thing based off of providing good information and, like, you know, putting it out there where you're like, you know what, I'm going to have to buy into this. This is bullshit. And like, that's what Rob's deal and everything we've talked about is we're going to road this motherfucker from the underground.
Battle the bullshit.
Yeah, we're going to fight the bullshit. So.
I think that's the biggest draw, same for all of us, as we know, is for us to Power Athlete, Rob, and the fact that you guys are more bullshit, we got to fix that, I don't know, we'll figure it out. In our world, I think we're all roads, and people all together. The second someone says this is the way, that fucking shit. The second someone has this is the way, I automatically check out, because there's no, you know, you said I don't know how many times today, but it's awesome. Like, I love it, you know, and that's I think our biggest problem.
I have no idea why people pay to show up and get that. I'm like, I don't fucking know.
We had hell of a deal in Power Athlete. You guys are, those of you guys that were involved in it early on, Field Strong. We had did all this training, and it was this great thing. We were going to have this big testing week, and I had everybody film their lifts and provide all their information back. And like all of a sudden, I get all of these numbers. I'm going through the numbers, I'm looking through the lifts, and there was zero correlation between anything. And the only thing that struck me as I watched all the videos was that everybody was really slow. And I remember, like, you know, like hitting up, and I called Lou Simmons and I called Dr. Fred Hatfield, and like I was trying to figure out like why people were slow, and it just like it was the weirdest thing. And I remember like calling these guys up, and like Doc Hatfield was like, you know, you can't expect people to move fast unless they're moving fast, you know, in a dynamic way. And like that's where we got into the compensatory acceleration. And you know, it was something that Zangus, the old guy that the old Power Athlete, right, God rest his soul, that trained me, used to talk about all the time. Like, I want you to move that bar as violently as you can. Like, you know, and he used to joke, and I always talk about it, you know, the people that lift weights real slow and careful, or, you know, lift weights like old people have sex. And that was the old Zangus one. But, you know, and that idea of being angry at the bar, and I'm going to vertical jump this thing out, and that compensatory acceleration, as soon as he said it, I was like, Doc, I know exactly what you're talking about. We got away from it. What do we do? I went back and design programming, went compensatory acceleration, and instantly, like that next thing, everybody hit like all the PRs they could, and I realized I got away from my roots. And you always kind of go back to the garage, and I still get emails. People ask me about what Zangus and those guys did, and I was like, we didn't deadlift much, and we were real mad at the bar. That was it.
One interesting thing, we talked a lot about it, you almost had to sneak the speed in by prescribing like 55, 60, 65% of what they were doing.
Don't tell all the secrets.
What I did is I created a max and a training max, which was a scam. So I was like, your training max is what I want. I want you to take your max. I want you to take 10% off of your training max, and then we're going to base percentages. So what I did is by taking the training max, I could actually give a percentage that people felt good about themselves, but allowed them to move dynamically with the speed. We went and bought a Tendo unit. We started testing it and really figured out how fast we needed people to move and how it all fit together. And then to the point where we watched it enough to where I could watch video and get move faster. That's like 0.6 meters, 0.4 meters. And then one day we deadlifted heavy, and Luke deadlifted a
0.0 0.01.
His deadlift took 11 seconds.
It's not.
So, I mean, you know, and then it was like.
I'm not proud, but you know what? I didn't quit.
It's true, you didn't quit. like that type of stuff. Yeah, you know, like that idea and you know, the people, you know, compensatory acceleration and just really looking and trying to evolve the training and then realizing that there's these little significant pieces that you kind of have to layer in and then progress people at a rate which they're ready for. You know, if you start talking to a kid who's an amateur day one about compensatory acceleration, like, I don't know if it's meaningful. It is, you know, hey, I just need you to lift this weight in linear progression. You know, and like that becomes this kind of overarching deal. So I think, like you said, man, like being able to have people at your disposal that you can call, like, you know, like when Compex approached me, I knew I had information, and then I called Tom and talked to him. He's like, you know, a roommate at Penn State did his PhD in EMS. Let me send you all of his unpublished research. And so Tom will tell you the story, but he used to travel with all of his files. So he had like 14 file cabinets of all of his information. This is pre, you know, internet, pre anything. So he had like a U-Haul. He'd have to drive around with all of his stuff. And like, he has a funny story about this guy trying to steal it from him. But he like sends me, because he had some guys scan it, and I get all this unpublished research about it, like leg angle, like it's more advantageous to be at 60 degrees, 75, 90, how it all fits, you know, pieces, how to use, you know, if you do it, you're going to boost, you know. So it completely was all this great information. And I was like, all right, let's test it. I mean, we did right into the program, we test it, and I get all these great results back. And I think like that's where it becomes like what you guys don't realize is that you guys are doing research stuff. And it's me doing research in terms of human performance, so that when somebody comes and asks me, whether it's a Ken Ford, how do you do this? I'm like, and he's like, well, how many people you tested on? I'm like, probably 400. And he's like, geez, it's pretty good. I'm like, yeah, we get results. So, I mean, it's for the same reason that the Muscle Genes guys are so excited, because he has a huge database of people that he can get information with. So, I mean, Tom's same thing. I mean, he's, you know, just the amount of volume of information, and then what happens when you get all this stuff back, you start looking for, you know, common points in a system within it. And you realize, well, everybody that does this, and everybody that does this. Okay, now how do I get it here? And, you know, that's what it is about, you know, stacking and kind of layering pieces in it at the point. And the big one for us especially is everybody's completely unrealistic about where they are within the training month. And I think that's what Power Athlete across the football is so impactful, is that people are like, well, I'm a beginner. And, you know, you have Eric Willibridge who squats 1,000 pounds. I'll just do Eric Willibridge's program. Little do they know that Eric Willibridge is like a freak of nature, but also has been training since he was 12 years old in this program. So he has 14 years of doing this. Why is it that you think you could do that program? And, you know, like really looking at it and being like, how do we know, like, what do we know of physiology? How do we work with beginners? And then at which point do they hit in this next stage? And I think we were able to hyper jump in 2 years what took people 20 years to get to, because people did not adhere to that idea of physiology and training people within the point at which they're ready. You know, in the age old, like, you know, the master appears and the student's ready, same thing. When the people are ready, the program appears, we already have it. We just have to get you to that point. And we get fought on that shit all the time. People are like, you know, and Levi and those guys are, you know, in, you know, working with his PhD. And, you know, I'm sure if Levi were to go and say that, they'd be like, no, that's not how you do 8 to 12 sets, or 8 to 12 reps, 3 sets. You know, you do this and this, and you periodize it. And it's like, because that's conventional structure. Yeah. And I think like that's what we're trying to fight against, this idea of like, hey, you know, we were able to hyper jump a lot of this just for the mere fact that we've just had such a big population to work with. And on top of it, had the opportunity to teach hundreds of seminars around the globe. I don't know anybody other than people in the CrossFit community that have taught this many places to this many people on this many continents this fast. Perform better doesn't do this many. I mean, think about, like, that's why these guys are all world warriors. These guys have coached on every continent to world-class athletes, and they are world-class coaches because they travel the world teaching this thing. So to me, I mean, that's, you know, these guys are world warriors. So going to South Africa for the weekend is by far the most aggressive one.
You have no idea.
That's an aggressive one.
Yeah.
So, but I will just add value to that in terms of most of the coaches I come in contact with are only limited to either their gym and assessing and working with those athletes for college. So you get one athlete, you work with them for 4 years, they're limited to a basketball team of 15 guys, maybe 30 in 4 years. And we do 30 a weekend. So that has really accelerated the education and development, I guess, as coaches. It's great.
So this is probably like a 5-hour podcast, feels like. Any other questions, guys, that you want to get on record, or are we solid? Tacos are like 20 minutes away.
Cool. Yeah.
I have a quick question. We had alluded to it earlier. We were talking about glucose levels, and are you guys just doing a generic prick and making sure you're staying below 85?
Yeah, I mean, Tom's probably the expert to talk about it, but when we really looked at it, was anything, right around that 80, if I could keep it under 80, and then we found a bunch of protocols to keep me under 80. But it was first thing in the morning, I was always high. And then as soon as I ate, 15 minutes later, it was like 20 points less. And then, but yeah, it was just a standard glucose meter, pinprick. And then what was pretty interesting, after doing it for about 2 weeks and making a log, I pretty much knew just off the feel, because all of a sudden, like, well, how do I feel? And then there was a doctor Rob set me up with who was doing something similar, and he had a deal where he got hit with some Chinese food. He went out Chinese food, and his glucose went to 170, and he jumped on he would just jump on his Aerodyne, his bike, and ride, and then in 15 minutes it would come down, and he would take it. So then I put an Aerodyne in my living room in my old house. And if I ever got dosed and it went up too high, I immediately jumped on and I did the bike to try to bring it back down. And I got the point where, if I ever got hit with anything, or if I ever could feel it all of a sudden, I could jump on and use that non-glucose uptake to really bring it back down. So make sure you ask Tom about it. He knows. Hopefully he'll tell you the story about when he was in college for his research project, training the natural bodybuilder to win the. What did he win? Yeah, so Tom trained the last all natural bodybuilder.
All natty,
bro.
Yeah.
For a pro contest, and then so Tom, I love the story, but I'll tell you a little bit. So he goes through his whole deal. They do some amazing research project, and so he thinks he's like the pinnacle, and he's with them, hand up, and then the guy's dad walks up, and the dude's dad has 20-inch calves and a bend in his bicep, and the dude's and his uncle, right? So Tom was so excited, and he sees the dad and the uncle walk up, who he probably could have gotten in shape to win the bodybuilding show in 2 weeks, and he's like, it's fucking genetics. So it's one of my favorite stories for Tom, but hopefully he'll tell it to you. So.
All right, well, let's wrap it up, and then we'll do a little break, and then we'll have some food. So that's good stuff. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Drop on.
Now it's time for you to empower your performance. As I've said before, if your website is also your name, you're a huge deal. Head over to robbwolf.com, that's ROBB wolf.com for more information, including his book, The Paleo Solution. Robb also hosts his own podcast, and it can be found right there on his website as well. Keep up with Robb the Lazy Man's Way by finding him on Instagram under the name Das Robb Wolf. That's DAS Robb Wolf. Until next time, bye!